Hey there, welcome to Brad Arrows. Tonight, we've got hours of chilling horror stories combined with soothing rain sounds to help you relax and sleep. Before you drift off, leave a comment below and let us know where you're listening from and what time it is. If these stories give you chills, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Get cozy and let the fear take over. Victoria Miller jolted awake, her scream piercing the darkness of the bedroom. Sweat-soaked sheets twisted around her legs as she clawed at her right ear, eyes wild with terror. The digital clock on the nightstand cast an eerie red glow, 3:17 a.m. "Tori, what's wrong?" Jake fumbled for the lamp's switch, his voice thick with sleep. She couldn't answer immediately. The nightmare had been so vivid, tiny pale creatures crawling through her ear canal, burrowing deeper into her head. But as consciousness fully returned, something else remained, a faint scratching sound from inside her ear. Not imagined, not a dream echo. Real. "There's something moving inside my head," she whispered, her fingers trembling against her ear. Jake switched on the lamp, squinting in the sudden light. "Honey, it was just a nightmare." His words died as his gaze fixed on her ear. His face drained of color. Something small and white was emerging from Tori's ear canal. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from. Now let's continue with the story. Victoria Miller had always prided herself on adaptability. In the 15 years she taught high school biology at Mountain View High in rural Montana, she'd handled everything from chemical spills to student protests, and once even talked down a panicked elk that had wandered into her classroom during migration season. Crisis management was second nature to her. At 38, with her practical auburn hair pulled back in a perpetual ponytail, and laugh lines earned from years of teenage humor, Tori was the person others turned to when things went sideways. Born and raised in the shadow of the Rockies, she'd briefly escaped to college with dreams of marine biology research. Instead, she fell in love first with teaching, then with Jake Miller, the earnest young man who managed his family's construction business. Ocean research dreams faded, replaced by the quiet satisfaction of shaping young minds and building a life in the same mountain valley where she'd grown up. Jake, now 41 with calloused hands and sun-weathered features, had always been the worrier in their relationship. His concern for Tori's occasional dismissal of health issues had been the source of more than one heated discussion over their 12 years together. "Better safe than sorry" was Jake's motto. "It'll work itself out" was Tori's. Their differences balanced each other, mostly. Just 40 minutes up the winding mountain road, Tori's cousin Rebecca Thornton had inherited the family cattle ranch after her parents moved to Arizona for warmer winters. At 35, Rebecca embodied the free spirit Tori sometimes wished she'd allowed herself to become. Rebecca raised organic beef and a small herd of highland cattle, living by her own rules and the rhythm of the seasons. The cousins remained close despite their different paths, with Tori spending many weekends helping on the ranch, reconnecting with her agricultural roots. The town's small medical community included Dr. Samuel Carter, the 60-something ear, nose, and throat specialist, whose office occupied the ground floor of a log building on Main Street. His reputation for directness was as well known as his diagnostic skill, honed over 4 decades of mountain medicine. When cases exceeded his capabilities, Dr. Carter called upon Dr. Maria Rodriguez from the Regional Medical Center in Billings. At 45, she was renowned for her microsurgical expertise and calm demeanor, even in the most challenging situations. Little did Tori know how soon she would need both doctors' combined skills, or how drastically her orderly life was about to change. The last weekend of July had been unseasonably warm, perfect for Torai's visit to Rebecca's ranch. It arrived early Saturday morning, travel mug of coffee in hand, eager to escape the summer school paperwork piling up on her dining room table. Jake had opted to stay home, using the weekend to repair their deck that had suffered during the harsh mountain winter. "City girl," Rebecca called from the porch of the weathered ranch house, using the teasing nickname that only she was allowed to use. Her wild red hair was piled atop her head, secured with what looked like a pencil. "Get your suburban self up here and give me a hug," Tori laughed as she climbed the porch steps. "I live 20 minutes away in the same valley we grew up in. Hardly suburban. Anyone who pays for a gym membership when they could just throw hay bales for free is suburban in my book," Rebecca teased, pulling her cousin into a tight embrace that smelled of fresh bread and mountain air. Spent the morning in companionable work, moving cattle between pastures and checking the water systems that fed the high meadows. The July sun beat down mercilessly, and by noon both women were streaked with dust and sweat. "Lake time," Rebecca suggested, wiping her brow with the back of her gloved hand. The water's still cold enough to be refreshing. The high alpine lake behind the main pasture had been their childhood refuge, a glacier-fed pool that Rebecca's grandfather had dammed years ago for irrigation. They changed into swimsuits and hiked up the well-worn trail, diving into the shockingly cold water with twin shrieks of delight. Tori floated on her back, eyes closed against the brilliant blue sky. Eagles circled overhead, and somewhere in the distance, a tractor rumbled across the far meadow. Perfect peace. "Watch out," Rebecca suddenly splashed water toward Tori's face. "Those damn flies are awful this year." Tori blinked water from her eyes to see Rebecca swatting at the air. Several large flies buzzed around them, seemingly more interested in the humans than the nearby alpine vegetation. What's with them?" Tori asked, ducking her head briefly underwater to discourage a particularly persistent one. "Something to do with the cattle, I think," Rebecca shrugged. "They've been worse than usual this summer. I probably should have warned you." "Flies are just flies," Tori dismissed, though she did swim closer to shore where they seemed less concentrated. Later that afternoon, they walked to the main pasture with buckets of mineral supplement. The July heat had rendered the normally active highland cattle lethargic, most seeking shade beneath the scattered pine trees dotting the field. "Poor girls," Rebecca said, pouring supplement into the troughs. "The flies torment them too." Tori noticed the cattle occasionally shaking their heads violently, as if trying to dislodge invisible tormentors. One young heifer trotted over to Rebecca, rubbing against her leg like an oversized cat seeking attention. "This is Rosie," Rebecca introduced, scratching behind the animal's ears. "She thinks she's a house pet." As Tori reached down to pet Rosie, she felt something tickle her ear. She swatted reflexively, feeling a momentary sharp sensation before it was gone. "Ouch, got you, did they?" Rebecca asked sympathetically. "Those flies can bite sometimes." Driving home that evening, Tori felt a slight discomfort in her right ear. She worked her jaw back and forth, trying to pop the ear as she would after flying. Probably just like water, she reasoned, dismissing the minor irritation. By Tuesday morning, the discomfort hadn't subsided. If anything, it had intensified slightly, accompanied by a feeling of fullness and minor hearing reduction. Standing before her bathroom mirror, Tori tilted her head to the side, gently pulling on her earlobe. "Come on, come out," she muttered, hoping to drain any trapped water. Nothing happened. She tried hopping on one foot, a childhood remedy their mother had always suggested, feeling slightly ridiculous as she bounced on the bathroom tile. Throughout the school day, the sensation persisted, occasionally accompanied by what sounded like faint white noise or static. By evening, she'd convinced herself it was just earwax buildup, a logical explanation that required no medical intervention. Maybe you should have Dr. Carter take a look, Jake suggested as they prepared dinner. Ear problems can get serious if you ignore them. It's nothing, Tori insisted, chopping vegetables with perhaps more force than necessary. Probably just wax from swimming in the lake. I'll pick up some ear drops tomorrow. Over the next week, Tori tried various home remedies. Warm olive oil drops, a diluted hydrogen peroxide rinse, even a contraption ordered online that promised to safely remove earwax with gentle irrigation. Nothing helped. The discomfort remained, and occasionally, especially at night, she thought she could hear a faint rustling sound, like tissue paper being crumpled very softly, very far away. WebMD says it could be eustachian tube dysfunction, she told Jake one evening, her tablet balanced on her knees as she scrolled through medical websites. Or just impacted earwax, Jake replied from his armchair across the living room. WebMD also says a headache could be a brain tumor. Please see a real doctor. If it's not better by next week, I promise I will, she said, knowing this compromise would temporarily satisfy his concern. That night she dreamed of insects, large, buzzing creatures that landed on her pillow and crawled toward her ear while she lay paralyzed, unable to swat them away. She woke with a start at 3 a.m., her hand instinctively covering her ear protectively. Beside her, Jake slept peacefully, unaware of her racing heart. Just a dream, she whispered to herself in the darkness. But as she lay back down, she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right, that the persistent discomfort in her ear was more than just trapped water or excess wax. For the first time, a tendril of genuine worry crept into her mind, but by morning light, practical Tori had pushed it aside again. She had lesson plans to finalize and a classroom to prepare. A slightly bothersome ear would have to wait. By mid-August, Tori could no longer pretend nothing was wrong. The persistent discomfort in her ear had evolved into intermittent sharp pain, and her hearing on the right side had noticeably diminished. She found herself constantly turning her head in class, positioning her good ear toward students who raised their hands in the back row. On Wednesday afternoon, while reviewing cellular structure with her AP biology students, a sudden stabbing pain lanced through her ear with such intensity that she grabbed the edge of her lab table, knuckles whitening as she fought to maintain composure. Mrs. Miller, Marcus Thompson, a serious-minded junior in the front row, looked up from his microscope with concern etched across his young features. "Are you okay? You look really pale." 24 pairs of eyes turned toward her, curious and slightly alarmed. Or I forced a smile, though beads of cold sweat had formed along her hairline. "I'm fine, Marcus. Just a little dizzy for a moment." She straightened, releasing her death grip on the table. Sometimes that happens when you spend too much time looking through microscopes. A ripple of understanding laughter broke the tension, but Marcus continued watching her with unconvinced eyes that seemed too perceptive for a 16-year-old. Tori turned to write on the whiteboard, using the moment to compose herself. The pain had receded to a dull throb, but something else had taken its place. A faint but distinct sensation of movement. That night, as Jake snored softly beside her, Tori lay awake staring at the ceiling. The house creaked and settled around her, familiar sounds of home that usually brought comfort. But tonight, she was attuned to a different sound, one that came from inside her own head. A soft, intermittent scratching, like tiny claws against paper. She slipped out of bed and padded to the bathroom, closing the door before turning on the light. In the mirror, she looked haggard dark circles beneath her eyes from nights of interrupted sleep. Tilting her head, she used her phone's flashlight to examine her ear as best she could, but saw nothing beyond the entrance to the ear canal. The scratching sound came again, followed by a sensation that made her stomach lurch. Something inside her ear had definitely moved. Not fluid shifting, not a muscle twitch, but something with purpose. Tori barely made it to the toilet before retching, her mind racing with horrific possibilities. When she returned to bed, she lay rigidly on her left side, keeping her right ear elevated as if whatever might be inside could somehow fall out. "Jake," she whispered, shaking his shoulder gently. "Jake, wake up." He stirred, groggy, squinting at her in the darkness. "What's wrong?" "I need to see Dr. Carter tomorrow, first thing." His eyes widened, instantly more alert. "Your ear." She nodded, not trusting her voice. "I'll call as soon as they open," he promised, reaching out to brush hair from her face. "Try to sleep now." But sleep remained elusive, her mind conjuring increasingly terrifying scenarios about what might be happening inside her ear canal. The next morning, Jake called Dr. Carter's office the moment the clock struck 8. The receptionist initially offered an appointment the following week, but Jake's uncharacteristic insistence, bordering on pleading, secured a slot for that afternoon due to a last-minute cancellation. "I'll drive you," he said, already calling his foreman to cover the construction site. "You don't need to miss work," Tori protested weakly, but the relief in her eyes betrayed her words. Dr. Carter's waiting room hadn't changed in the 20 years Tori had been coming there. The same mountain landscapes on the walls, the same dog-eared magazines on the side tables, the same slightly antiseptic smell. Usually, these familiar surroundings brought comfort. Today, they only intensified her anxiety as she mentally cataloged her symptoms for the doctor. Victoria Miller, the nurse called her name after what felt like hours, but had only been 25 minutes. Jake squeezed her hand before she stood. "Want me to come back with you?" He shook her head. "I'll be fine." Her standard response, though she felt anything but fine. The examination room was chilly, and Tori shivered slightly in the thin paper gown the nurse had instructed her to change into. Dr. Carter entered moments later, his silver hair neatly combed, reading glasses perched on the end of his nose as he reviewed her chart. "Tori," he greeted without looking up. "Says here you're having ear discomfort. Duration approximately 2 weeks. "Almost 3 weeks now," she corrected. "It started after I went swimming at my cousin's ranch. I thought it was just water in my ear, but it's gotten worse. There's pain and my hearing is affected." She hesitated, reluctant to voice her greatest fear aloud. Dr. Carter finally looked up, his keen blue eyes assessing her. "And what else, Tori?" She swallowed hard. "Sometimes I think I can feel something moving in there, and hear it too." If she expected skepticism, Dr. Carter offered none. Instead, he nodded thoughtfully. "Have you been anywhere rural recently, particularly around livestock?" "My cousin's ranch, like I mentioned. She raises Highland cattle." Something flickered across the doctor's face, recognition, perhaps, or concern. He set her chart aside and reached for his otoscope. "Let's have a look, shall we? Turn your head toward the left, please." Tori complied, her heart pounding as she felt the cold tip of the instrument enter her ear canal. Dr. Carter was silent as he examined her, his breathing the only sound in the room. Then he withdrew the otoscope abruptly. "I'd like to use our video otoscope for this examination. It will give us a better view, and you'll be able to see what I'm seeing on the monitor." "Janet," he called to his nurse, "please set up the video scope in room 2. Tori's mouth went dry. "Is something wrong?" "Let's not jump to conclusions until we have a clear picture," he replied, his professional demeanor firmly in place. "But I'd like to ask you a few more questions while Janet prepares the equipment. These flies at your cousin's ranch, did you notice anything unusual about them? Were they particularly persistent around the cattle's heads?" Tori thought back to that July afternoon. "Yes, actually. The cattle were shaking their heads a lot. Rebecca said the flies had been worse than usual this year. Dr. Carter nodded as if she'd confirmed something. And did you feel anything strange while you were there? A sharp sensation near your ear, perhaps. The memory surfaced immediately, that brief sharp feeling while petting Rosie the heifer. Yes, actually. I thought something bit me, but it was so quick. The doctor's expression remained neutral, but his fingers drummed briefly against his thigh. A nervous gesture that did nothing to alleviate Tori's growing anxiety. Room 2 contained more sophisticated equipment, including a large monitor mounted on the wall. Janet, the nurse, was adjusting settings when they entered. "Sit here, please," Dr. Carter directed, patting a padded examination chair. "This will be similar to before, but the scope is slightly larger and has a camera attached. I'll need you to remain very still." Tori nodded, fixing her gaze on the blank monitor as she felt the scope enter her ear. The screen flickered to life, displaying a magnified view of her ear canal. Even to her untrained eye, the tissue looked inflamed, redder than it should be. Dr. Carter navigated the scope deeper, his movements precise and measured. Then he stopped, and Tori heard him inhale sharply. "Sweet Jesus," he muttered so quietly she almost missed it. "What?" Tori asked, her voice higher than normal. "What is it?" Dr. Carter didn't answer immediately. Instead, he called out, "Janet, get Dr. Rodriguez on the phone right now. Tell her it's urgent, suspected hypoderma linidum infestation, human host." The clinical terminology meant nothing to Tori, but the urgency in his voice sent ice through her veins. "Look at the monitor, Tori," Dr. Carter said gently, adjusting the scope slightly. She raised her eyes to the screen and felt the world tilt sideways. There, nestled against the inflamed wall of her ear canal, was something that had no right to be there, a pale, segmented organism about the size of a grain of rice. As she watched in horror, it moved, tiny hook-like appendages gripping the tissue of her ear. "What is that?" she whispered, though part of her already knew the terrible answer. "That," Dr. Carter said gravely, "is a cattle-bot fly larva, and I'm afraid it's not alone. I can see at least 2 more deeper in the canal." The room seemed to spin around Tori as the full implications hit her. There were larvae living parasites inside her ear. They had been there for weeks, growing, feeding, causing the pain and hearing loss she tried so hard to ignore. "We need to remove them immediately," Dr. Carter was saying, his voice seeming to come from very far away. "Dr. Rodriguez is a specialist who can perform the microsurgery required. Janet is calling her now." Tori nodded numbly, unable to tear her eyes from the monitor, from the alien thing living inside her body. On the screen, the larva shifted again, and she felt the corresponding movement in her ear, a sensation that would haunt her nightmares for months to come. The next few hours passed in a blur for Tori. Dr. Carter had immediately called the school to arrange for a substitute teacher, while Jake paced the small examination room, his face ashen after seeing the monitor. The parasites in his wife's ear had rendered him uncharacteristically silent, his usual problem-solving nature overwhelmed by the horror of the situation. "I should have insisted you see someone sooner," he finally said, his voice thick with self-recrimination. "I knew something wasn't right." Tori reached for his hand, anchoring herself to his familiar touch. "This isn't your fault. I'm the one who kept dismissing it." Dr. Carter returned with a clipboard of forms and a grim expression. "Dr. Rodriguez can be here by 2 o'clock. She's bringing specialized equipment from the medical center." He glanced at his watch. "That gives us about 3 hours to prepare. In the meantime, I'd like to start you on intravenous antibiotics to address the infection that's developing." "Well, this," Tori swallowed hard, forcing herself to ask the question that terrified her most. "Will this affect my hearing permanently?" The doctor's hesitation spoke volumes before he even opened his mouth. The larvae have caused inflammation and some tissue damage. Once they're removed, much of that should heal. But I won't lie to you, Tori. There is risk of some permanent hearing impairment, especially if any of the larvae have penetrated deeper toward the middle ear. Jake's grip on her hand tightened. But you can get them all out, right? That's why I've called Dr. Rodriguez. She's one of the best microsurgeons in the state. If anyone can remove these parasites with minimal additional damage, it's her. As a nurse inserted an IV line into Tori's arm to begin the antibiotics, Dr. Carter explained what they were dealing with. Hypoderma liniatum is commonly known as the cattle-bot fly or heel fly. The adult female typically deposits larvae near a bovine's back or sides, and the larvae then migrate through the animal's tissue to the back. In rare cases, very rare in humans, they can enter other locations, including the ear canal. How did this happen to me? Tori asked, her mind flashing back to that July afternoon at the ranch. The adult fly likely deposited larvae near your ear while you were at your cousin's ranch. It would have happened quickly. You might have felt a sharp sensation for just a moment. The memory crystallized with terrible clarity, that brief sharp feeling while petting Rosie. What she had dismissed as a simple insect bite had been something far more sinister. I need to call Rebecca, Tori said suddenly. She needs to know about this. Her cattle could be affected. Dr. Carter nodded. That would be wise. The flies can cause significant distress to the animals, though they're better adapted to cope with these parasites than humans are. Jake stepped out to make the call, leaving Tori alone with her thoughts and the unsettling awareness of the creatures living inside her ear. The IV antibiotics were making her slightly drowsy, but not enough to dull the psychological horror of her situation. When Jake returned, his expression was tight. Rebecca's on her way. She's beside herself with guilt. It's not her fault, Tori insisted. How could she have known this would happen? That's what I told her, but you know your cousin. She feels responsible for everything that happens on that ranch. The door opened, and Janet appeared with a hospital gown. We're moving you to the surgical suite to prep for Dr. Rodriguez's arrival, she explained gently. The surgical suite was really just a specialized treatment room in Dr. Carter's practice, but it had been equipped with additional lights and machinery in preparation for the procedure. Tori changed into the gown, feeling vulnerable as she settled onto the narrow table. A surgical drape was placed over her body, leaving only her head exposed. Try to relax, Janet advised, checking the IV. Dr. Rodriguez will be here soon. Relaxation seemed impossible under the circumstances, but Tori closed her eyes, trying to steady her breathing. Her mind wandered back to Rebecca's ranch, to the peaceful lake where this nightmare had begun. She remembered floating on her back, the sun warm on her face, eagles circling overhead. She'd felt so content in that moment, so blissfully unaware of the danger literally buzzing around her. A soft knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. Rebecca stood in the doorway, her normally vibrant face pale and drawn, eyes red-rimmed from crying. Tori, she whispered, rushing to her cousin's side. I'm so sorry, I had no idea this could happen. Don't you dare blame yourself, Tori said firmly. This is just terrible luck. Rebecca shook her head, red curls bouncing with the movement. I should have warned you more strongly about those flies. They've been tormenting the cattle all summer. I've had the vet out 3 times already. Has anyone else been affected? Jake asked from his position at Tori's other side. No, thank goodness. I called everyone who's visited in the last month to warn them, but so far, no one else has had any symptoms. Rebecca took Tori's hand, her fingers cold with anxiety. The vet is coming tomorrow to treat the whole herd and spray the pasture areas. He says human infections are incredibly rare. That's what Dr. Carter said too, Tori assured her. Just bad luck. The door opened again, and a woman in surgical scrubs entered. She was shorter than Tori had expected, with silver-streaked black hair pulled back in a tight bun and intelligent dark eyes that assessed the room quickly. "I'm Dr. Maria Rodriguez," she introduced herself, moving directly to Torai's side. Something in her calm, authoritative manner immediately put Torai at ease. This was a woman who knew exactly what she was doing. "Thank you for coming so quickly," Torai said. "Botfly larvae wait for no one," Dr. Rodriguez replied with a small smile that softened her professional demeanor. "Now, Dr. Carter has shown me the images from the video otoscope. I'll need to do my own examination before we proceed, but I want to explain what we're facing." She pulled up a rolling stool and sat, bringing herself to eye level with Torai. "The larvae have attached themselves to the wall of your ear canal using small hook-like structures. They've caused inflammation and some tissue damage, which explains your pain and hearing impairment. Our goal is to remove them without causing additional trauma." "How will you do that?" Jake asked, his protective instincts in full force. "I'll use a microsurgical technique with specialized forceps designed for delicate work in confined spaces. We'll administer a local anesthetic to keep Mrs. Miller comfortable, though she will remain awake throughout the procedure. This is actually advantageous. Her feedback will help us ensure we're not causing additional damage." Dr. Rodriguez turned back to Torai. "I won't sugarcoat this. The procedure will be uncomfortable, and you'll be aware of what's happening. But we'll make it as painless as possible." Torai nodded, grateful for the doctor's honesty. "I just want them out." "Understandable," Dr. Rodriguez smiled again. "Let's get started with my examination, shall we?" Jake and Rebecca stepped out while Dr. Rodriguez conducted her assessment, using an even more sophisticated video otoscope than Dr. Carter's. The images appeared on a large monitor, positioned where Torai couldn't see it, a small mercy for which she was thankful. 3 larvae, as Dr. Carter identified, Dr. Rodriguez confirmed. 2 are relatively accessible in the outer portion of the canal. The 3rd has worked its way deeper, near the tympanic membrane, the eardrum. That one will be the most challenging to remove. Dr. Carter entered, now also wearing surgical scrubs. "The surgical suite is ready, Dr. Rodriguez." "Excellent. Let's move Mrs. Miller and get started." The next hour was one of the most surreal experiences of Torai's life. Positioned on her side with her right ear facing upward, she could see nothing of the procedure itself, but could hear the doctor's murmured conversations and feel the occasional gentle pressure as they worked. The local anesthetic had numbed most sensations, though she remained acutely aware of movement within her ear, a deeply unsettling feeling that no amount of medication could completely mask. "Larva successfully removed," Dr. Rodriguez announced after what seemed like an eternity, but had actually been only 20 minutes. "Container, please." Torai heard rather than saw the specimen being placed in what she imagined was a small container. She tried not to think about what the creature looked like, focusing instead on Jake's face. He had been allowed to stay in the room, sitting at a distance where he could see Torai, but not the procedure itself. His reassuring smile was strained but steady. "You're doing great, honey," he encouraged. "One down." The second larva proved more difficult, having attached itself more firmly to the canal wall. Torai felt a sharp twinge despite the anesthesia as Dr. Rodriguez worked to dislodge it. "Sorry about that," the doctor murmured. "These little guys really don't want to let go." "Take your time," Torai managed, fighting the instinct to flinch away from the instruments in her ear. "Just get it out. And there's the second one removed. One to go." Torai's back was beginning to ache from holding still for so long, but she dared not move. The final larva, the one near her eardrum, would be the most dangerous to extract. "Last one now," Dr. Rodriguez said, her voice betraying no fatigue despite the intense concentration required. "This is the one near your eardrum, Mrs. Miller. You may feel some different sensations as we work deeper. If anything becomes painful, tell me immediately." The work to remove the final larva seemed to take longer than the first two combined. Tori could sense the heightened tension in the room as Dr. Rodriguez navigated the delicate space near the eardrum. "Forceps slipping," Dr. Rodriguez muttered at one point. "Need the smaller gauge." Dr. Carter handed over a different instrument, and the procedure continued. Tori began to feel a dull throbbing despite the anesthetic, but bit her lip, determined to endure whatever was necessary to remove the final parasite. "I can see some minor damage to the tympanic membrane," Dr. Rodriguez said quietly to Dr. Carter. Previous to our intervention, from the larva's feeding activity, Tori's heart sank at these words. Damage to the eardrum could mean permanent hearing loss. She sought Jake's eyes again, finding strength in his steady gaze. "Almost got it," Dr. Rodriguez said. "One final approach. There." The relief in the doctor's voice was palpable. "Third larva removed successfully. Let's irrigate the canal with antibiotic solution and check for any remaining tissue damage." The cool sensation of the irrigation solution was oddly soothing after the ordeal of the extraction. Tori felt tears of relief slide down her face as Dr. Rodriguez announced that the procedure was complete. "All 3 larvae have been removed," she confirmed. "There is some tissue damage that will need to heal, and as I mentioned, some minor damage to your eardrum. We'll need to monitor this closely over the coming weeks." "Will my hearing return to normal?" Tori asked, voicing the question that had been foremost in her mind throughout the procedure. Dr. Rodriguez's expression was cautiously optimistic. "Much of the hearing loss you're experiencing is due to inflammation, which should improve with time and medication. The damage to the eardrum is minimal and may heal completely. However, we won't know the full extent of recovery for several weeks." Dr. Carter placed a gentle hand on Tori's shoulder. "What matters most right now is that the parasites are gone. Your body can begin healing." The aftermath of the procedure was a whirlwind of instructions, prescriptions, and follow-up appointments. Tori was prescribed a strong course of antibiotics to combat the infection, anti-inflammatory medications to reduce the swelling, and ear drops to aid in healing. Dr. Rodriguez scheduled a follow-up examination for the following week, and Dr. Carter insisted on calling daily to check on her progress. As Jake helped Tori to the truck, Rebecca hovered anxiously nearby, still clearly burdened by guilt despite her cousin's reassurances. "I'm shutting down the lake access until we get this under control," she declared. "And I've already called an exterminator to treat the entire property." "Rebecca, please," Tori said wearily. "This isn't your fault. Dr. Rodriguez said human infections are extremely rare. It was just bad luck. Bad luck or not, I'm taking every precaution. No one else is going to go through what you just did because of my ranch." The drive home was quiet, Tori leaning her head against the passenger window, physically and emotionally drained. Her ear was packed with medicated gauze, giving her a lopsided appearance that might have been comical under different circumstances. "I called Principal Martinez," Jake said as they turned onto their street. "He said to take as much time as you need and not to worry about lesson plans. The substitute can handle things." Tori nodded gratefully. The thought of facing her classroom seemed overwhelming at the moment. "Did Dr. Rodriguez show you the things they took out?" she asked hesitantly. Jake hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, they preserved them for testing." "What did they look like?" She wasn't sure why she wanted to know, except perhaps to give form to the nightmare she'd been living with. "Like small white grubs," he said after a moment. "About the size of rice grains, but alive. Moving." He shuddered visibly. "I don't think I'll ever get that image out of my head." Tori reached across to squeeze his hand. "I'm sorry you had to see that. I'm sorry you had to experience it," he countered. "But it's over now. They're gone, and you're going to heal." At home, Jake transformed into the caretaker he'd always been in times of crisis. He settled Tori in their bedroom with pillows propped just right to keep pressure off her affected ear, dispensed medications with military precision, set up a small bell for her to ring if she needed anything, and even placed a baby monitor on the nightstand so he could hear her from anywhere in the house. "You're going overboard," Tori protested weakly, though secretly grateful for his attentiveness. "Indulge me," he replied, kissing her forehead. "I didn't take care of you properly before. I'm making up for lost time." That night, despite the discomfort and the lingering psychological trauma of the day's events, Tori slept more soundly than she had in weeks. The constant irritation and mysterious movements that had plagued her were finally gone. As she drifted off, Jake's hand clasped gently in hers. She allowed herself to believe the worst was behind her. She couldn't have known how wrong she was. September arrived with a palette of autumn colors that transformed the Montana landscape into a canvas of reds, oranges, and golds. Tori watched the seasonal change from her living room window, a steaming mug of chamomile tea warming her hands. 3 weeks had passed since the procedure, and her recovery had progressed steadily, if slower than she'd hoped. The swelling in her ear canal had diminished, and the constant pain had receded to occasional twinges. Her follow-up visits with Dr. Rodriguez had been encouraging, with the specialist noting good healing of the tissue damage caused by the larvae. The minor tear in her eardrum was showing signs of repair, though Dr. Rodriguez cautioned that complete healing could take months. "You're one of the lucky ones," the doctor had told her during her last visit. Given how long those larvae were present, the damage could have been much worse. Lucky wasn't exactly how Tori would have described herself, but she understood the sentiment. She was healing, and for that she was grateful. The most frustrating lingering effect was the hearing loss. Though improved from immediately after the procedure, her right ear still felt muffled, as if she were underwater. Dr. Rodriguez had explained that this was likely temporary, a combination of residual inflammation and the healing eardrum. But the persistence of the symptom worried Tori more than she admitted to Jake or her doctors. After 3 weeks of recovery at home, Tori was growing restless. The school's substitute teacher, Mrs. Henderson, had been sending daily updates and student work samples, each envelope a bittersweet reminder of the classroom Tori missed desperately. "I'm going back on Monday," she announced to Jake over dinner on Thursday evening. "I can't sit around this house any longer." Jake paused, fork halfway to his mouth. "Are you sure that's wise?" Dr. Rodriguez said I'm healing well," Tori interrupted. "And she didn't say I couldn't work. I'm a teacher, Jake, not a deep-sea diver. My job doesn't exactly put strain on my ear." He sighed, recognizing the determination in her voice. "At least promise you'll take it easy. Half days to start, maybe. We'll see," she said noncommittally, though they both knew she had no intention of easing back gradually. Victoria Miller didn't do things halfway. Monday morning found her standing before her classroom door, heart racing with an unexpected mixture of anticipation and anxiety. Through the small window in the door, she could see her students already seated. Mrs. Henderson writing something on the whiteboard. Tori took a deep breath, straightened her cardigan, and entered. 28 heads swiveled in unison, and a moment of stunned silence was quickly followed by an eruption of excited voices. "Mrs. Miller, you're back." "We missed you." Mrs. Henderson, a retired teacher in her 60s, smiled warmly. Well, this is a wonderful surprise, children. Let's give Mrs. Miller a proper welcome, shall we? The class broke into spontaneous applause, and Tori felt tears pricking at her eyes. These moments, the pure, unfiltered joy of her students, were why she'd become a teacher in the first place. Thank you, everyone, she said, moving to the front of the room. I've missed you all terribly. Marcus Thompson, the observant boy who noticed her distress that day in August, raised his hand. Are you all better now, Mrs. Miller? The directness of teenagers never ceased to amaze her. I'm getting better every day, Marcus. Thank you for asking. After a brief transition period with Mrs. Henderson, Tori found herself alone with her class, slipping back into the familiar rhythm of teaching as if she'd never left. By mid-morning, however, she began to notice the challenges her partial hearing loss presented in the classroom. When Jessica Park asked a question from the back row, Tori had to ask her to repeat it twice. During small group work, the overlapping conversations created a confusing jumble of sound that her brain struggled to process. By lunchtime, she had developed a dull headache from the strain of constant concentration. You look tired, commented Alina Williams, the chemistry teacher, as they supervised the lunch period. First day back is always rough, Tori said with a forced smile. Just readjusting. I'll be fine. But as the afternoon progressed, the headache intensified, and she found herself increasingly positioning students who needed help on her left side. When the final bell rang, she collapsed into her desk chair, physically and mentally exhausted in a way she hadn't anticipated. The next few weeks followed a similar pattern. Tori adapted to her hearing limitation, developing strategies to manage the classroom despite the challenge. She arranged student desks in a horseshoe rather than rows, allowing her to see every face more clearly. She implemented a raised hand policy during discussions, ensuring only one student spoke at a time. She began relying more on visual cues and written instructions. Her students, perceptive as teenagers often are, adjusted to these changes without complaint. They noticed when Mrs. Miller turned her left ear toward them during conversations, and gradually began approaching her from that side without being asked. Several students took it upon themselves to act as volume monitors during group work, keeping noise levels manageable. By the end of September, Tori had established a new normal. Her hearing hadn't improved significantly, but she had learned to work around the limitation. Jake had stopped asking if she was pushing herself too hard, recognizing that returning to teaching had been essential for her emotional recovery, if occasionally challenging physically. On Halloween, the school held its annual costume contest and classroom parties. Tori dressed as Frida Kahlo, a character choice that delighted her art-loving students. The day was chaotic but joyful, with sugar-fueled teenagers rotating through classroom activities in various states of excitement. As the final bell approached, Tori supervised the cleanup of her classroom, helping students pack goodie bags and remove face paint before heading home. The room was warm from the afternoon sun and the energy of 28 costumed teenagers, and Tori found herself feeling slightly dizzy as she bent to pick up scattered candy wrappers. Mrs. Miller, can I take the leftover cupcakes home? Asked Ashley Chen, her witch hat slightly askew after a day of wear. Of course, Ashley. Just make sure to. Tori stopped mid-sentence as a sudden sharp pain lanced through her right ear. Her hand flew up instinctively, and she steadied herself against a desk. Mrs. Miller, Ashley's voice seemed to come from very far away. Are you okay? The pain receded as quickly as it had come, leaving behind a faint ringing sound. I'm fine, Ashley. Just a little headache from all the excitement. The girl didn't look convinced, but returned to packing up her belongings. Tori made it through the remaining minutes until dismissal, waving goodbye to her students with what she hoped was a reassuring smile. Once alone, She sank into her chair, a cold knot of fear forming in her stomach. Something wasn't right. She considered calling Jake, but decided against it. It was probably nothing, just strain from the noisy day, or perhaps a slight setback in her healing process. She would mention it at her next appointment with Dr. Rodriguez, scheduled for the following week. No need to worry Jake unnecessarily. That night, Tori woke at 2:17 a.m., her pillow damp with sweat. The pain in her ear had returned, sharper than before, and accompanied by a disturbing pressure sensation, as if something were pushing outward against her eardrum. More alarming was the heat. Her ear felt hot to the touch, the surrounding skin tender and slightly swollen. "Jake," she whispered, shaking her husband's shoulder. "Jake, wake up." He stirred, groggy, then sat up with alarm when he saw her face in the dim light from the bedside clock. "What's wrong?" "My ear. Something's wrong with my ear." Fully alert now, Jake turned on the lamp and gently brushed back her hair to examine the affected ear. He inhaled sharply at what he saw. "It's red and swollen, and you're burning up." He pressed a hand to her forehead. "I think you have a fever." The thermometer confirmed his assessment, 101.2 degrees. By 3 a.m., the pain had intensified to the point that Tori could no longer lie still, pacing the bedroom with one hand pressed to her ear, tears streaming down her face. "That's it," Jake declared, already pulling on jeans and a sweatshirt. "We're going to the emergency room. Now." The drive to Valley General Hospital took 25 minutes that felt like hours to Tori. Every bump in the road sent fresh waves of agony through her ear, and by the time they reached the emergency entrance, she was barely coherent, her consciousness narrowed to a pinpoint of excruciating pain. The triage nurse took one look at Tori's swollen, inflamed ear and immediately moved her to an examination room. "Possible mastoiditis," she noted on the chart, efficiently taking vitals as Jake explained about the bot fly larvae and previous procedure. The ER doctor, a young woman with tired eyes and a gentle touch, examined Tori carefully. "We need to get a CT scan," she said after completing her assessment. "I'm concerned about how quickly this has developed and the level of swelling behind the ear." The next few hours passed in a haze of tests, medications, and increasing concern from the medical team. The CT scan revealed what the ER doctor had feared: a significant infection had developed, not just in the ear canal, but in the mastoid bone behind the ear. More alarming was the cause. "There appears to be a foreign body near the middle ear," the radiologist reported, pointing to a small white mass on the scan. "Given the patient's history, I'd say we're looking at another larva, or possibly part of one that was missed during the initial procedure." Jake's face drained of color as the implication sank in. "You mean one of those things is still in there, after all this time?" "It's possible that a smaller larva was hidden deeper in the ear canal during the first procedure," the ER doctor explained. "Or perhaps a fragment remained. Either way, it's caused a serious infection that's spreading to surrounding structures." By morning, Tori's condition had deteriorated further. Her fever had spiked to 103 degrees, and the pain was now radiating across the entire right side of her head. Hospital had called in an otolaryngologist, an ear, nose, and throat specialist, who arrived just after 7 a.m., reviewing Tori's scans with a grim expression. "We need to operate immediately," he announced. "The infection is approaching the temporal bone, which puts both her hearing and potentially her central nervous system at risk." Jake, who hadn't left Tori's side through the night, looked shell-shocked. "How serious is this?" The specialist, Dr. William Reed, didn't sugarcoat his response. "Very serious. If the infection spreads to the inner ear, she could lose her hearing entirely in that ear. If it progresses to the brain, we're talking about potentially life-threatening complications. Tori, semi-conscious from pain medication, squeezed Jake's hand weakly. "Call Rebecca," she mumbled, "and Dr. Rodriguez." While nurses prepared Tori for surgery, Jake made the difficult calls. Rebecca answered on the first ring, as if she'd been sleeping with the phone in her hand. "What's happened?" she demanded, already knowing from Jake's tone that something was terribly wrong. He explained the situation as calmly as he could, though his voice broke when he reached the part about the mist larva and spreading infection. "I'm on my way," Rebecca said immediately. "I'll be there in an hour." Dr. Rodriguez proved more difficult to reach, being in surgery herself that morning, but her office promised to have her call as soon as possible. In the meantime, Dr. Reed assured Jake that he was fully capable of performing the necessary procedure. "This type of infection is my specialty," he said, though he admitted, "the cause is certainly unusual." As orderlies arrived to transport Tori to the operating room, Jake leaned down to kiss her forehead, now burning with fever. "You're going to be fine," he whispered, trying to project a confidence he didn't feel. "I'll be right here when you wake up." Tori nodded slightly, her eyes glassy from medication and fever. "Love you," she murmured as they wheeled her away. Left alone in the suddenly quiet room, Jake collapsed into a chair, the weight of the situation finally crushing his carefully maintained composure. His wife was facing a dangerous surgery and possible permanent deafness because of something he'd sensed was wrong weeks ago, but hadn't pushed hard enough to address. If he'd insisted she see Dr. Carter sooner, if he'd questioned Dr. Rodriguez's procedure more thoroughly, if he'd noticed signs of continuing problems. He was still sitting there, head in his hands, when Rebecca burst into the room 45 minutes later. Her hair was unbrushed, clothes hastily thrown on, eyes wild with worry. "Where is she? Is she in surgery already?" Jake nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Rebecca paced the small room like a caged animal. "This is my fault. All of it. If I'd been more careful about pest control on the ranch, if I'd warned her more strongly about those damn flies." "Stop," Jake cut her off, his voice sharper than intended. "This isn't helping Tori." Rebecca turned to him, tears streaming down her face. "But it is my fault, my ranch, my cattle, my flies. And my wife," Jake shouted, rising to his feet. "My wife who I should have protected, who told me she was fine when she wasn't, who I should have dragged to the doctor weeks earlier." They stared at each other, both breathing hard, united in their guilt and fear. Then Rebecca did something unexpected. She crossed the room and pulled Jake into a fierce hug. "She's going to be okay," she whispered against his shoulder. "She has to be." Dr. Rodriguez arrived just after noon, having come directly from her own surgical case once she received the message. She immediately requested access to the operating room where Dr. Reed had been working for over 4 hours. "I need to see exactly what we're dealing with," she explained to Jake and Rebecca. "Dr. Reed is excellent, but I have specific experience with these parasites." Another hour passed before Dr. Reed emerged from surgery, still in his scrubs, looking exhausted but cautiously optimistic. "We've removed what appears to be a fragment of a larva from deep in the ear canal, near the middle ear," he reported. It had been partially encapsulated by tissue, which is why it wasn't visible during the initial procedure. Unfortunately, it caused a significant infection that spread to the mastoid bone. "What does that mean for Tori's hearing?" Jake asked, dreading the answer. Dr. Reed's expression sobered. "The infection caused some damage to the ossicles, the small bones that transmit sound in the middle ear, and there's inflammation in the cochlea, which is part of the inner ear. It's too soon to know the full extent of hearing loss, but I'm afraid some degree of permanent impairment is likely." Rebecca made a small, wounded sound, and Jake reached for her hand automatically. Dr. Rodriguez assisted with the final stages of the procedure. Dr. Reed continued. We've cleared the infection and placed antibiotic-impregnated materials in the surgical site. Tori will need to remain in the hospital for several days for IV antibiotics and monitoring, but she'll recover. Otherwise, Frank pressed, apart from the hearing issue. Barring any complications, yes. She's young and healthy, which works in her favor. The fever should resolve once the infection is under control. Jake nodded, clinging to this small reassurance. When can we see her? She'll be in recovery for about an hour, then move to a room in the surgical ward. A nurse will come get you when she's settled. After Dr. Reed left, Jake and Rebecca sat in silence, the weight of his words settling over them. Permanent hearing loss. The two words echoed in Jake's mind, conjuring images of Tori struggling in her classroom, Tori missing parts of conversations, Tori permanently altered by this ordeal. She's strong, Rebecca said finally, as if reading his thoughts. Stronger than either of us. She'll adapt. Jake nodded, wanting to believe it. She shouldn't have to. No, Rebecca agreed softly. She shouldn't. When they were finally allowed to see Tori, Jake was struck by how small she looked in the hospital bed, surrounded by monitors and IV lines. Her head was partially bandaged, covering the right ear and wrapped around to the back of her skull. Her face was pale beneath the oxygen cannula, but her breathing was steady. Jake took the chair closest to the bed, gently taking her hand, careful not to disturb the IV. Rebecca stood at the foot of the bed, one hand resting lightly on Tori's blanket-covered foot, as if needing the physical connection to assure herself that her cousin was still there. Dr. Rodriguez joined them shortly, her surgical cap still on, eyes tired but alert. She did well, she reported without preamble. The infection was extensive but contained. We've removed all traces of the larval fragment and debrided the infected tissue. And her hearing. Jake asked the question he couldn't stop himself from returning to. Dr. Rodriguez's expression softened with compassion. There is damage to the conductive mechanisms of the middle ear. Some of this may heal with time, but given the extent of the infection and the delicate structures involved, I think we need to prepare for the possibility of significant permanent hearing loss in that ear. The blunt assessment, delivered with genuine regret, hit Jake like a physical blow. Rebecca made a choked sound and turned away, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. What does that mean for her day-to-day life? Jake asked, struggling to process the implications for her teaching. Many people function very well with unilateral hearing loss, Dr. Rodriguez assured him. There are excellent hearing aids and adaptive strategies that can help. Tori is intelligent and motivated. Those are huge advantages in adjusting to this kind of change. Jake nodded mechanically, trying to focus on the positive aspects of the doctor's words, rather than the underlying confirmation that his wife's life had been permanently altered. He looked down at Tori's sleeping face, so peaceful now that the pain was controlled, and made a silent promise to help her through whatever challenges lay ahead. As if sensing his thoughts, Tori's fingers twitched slightly in his hand. Her eyelids fluttered, and she turned her head minutely toward him, the first signs of emerging consciousness. She's waking up, Jake said, leaning closer. Tori, can you hear me, honey? You're in the hospital. The surgery went well. Her eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first, then settling on his face. Her lips moved, forming a word he couldn't hear. Jake leaned closer still. What was that? He asked gently. Tori tried again, her voice a barely audible whisper. Quiet, she said. Everything's so quiet. The weeks following Tori's second surgery unfolded in a haze of hospital rooms, doctor's appointments, and gradual, painstaking recovery. October arrived with unseasonably cold temperatures and the first dusting of snow. turning the world outside her window into a silent wonderland that matched the muffled reality Tori now inhabited. She spent 6 days in the hospital, battling the persistent infection with powerful intravenous antibiotics that left her nauseated and weak. Jake rarely left her side, sleeping in the uncomfortable visitor's chair despite her protests. His face growing more haggard with each passing day. Rebecca came daily, bringing homemade soup and fresh flowers, her usual buoyant personality subdued by lingering guilt. On the 7th day, Dr. Rodriguez declared the infection under control, and Tori was discharged with a complex regimen of oral antibiotics, anti-inflammatory medications, and strict instructions for wound care. Bandages around her head were replaced with a smaller dressing, covering just the surgical site behind her ear. But the damage inside couldn't be so neatly wrapped and hidden away. The right ear is showing significant conductive and sensorineural hearing loss. Dr. Rodriguez explained during a follow-up appointment 2 weeks after the surgery. She spoke slightly louder than normal, positioning herself on Tori's left side's small accommodations that Tori both appreciated and resented. "In plain English, please," Tori requested, her voice tight with tension. "You have damage to both the mechanisms that conduct sound waves, the eardrum and middle ear bones, and to the nerve pathways that transmit sound signals to your brain," Dr. Rodriguez clarified. "Based on our testing, you've lost approximately 70% of hearing function in that ear." Jake, sitting beside Tori, reached for her hand. She let him take it, but her fingers remained limp in his grasp. "Will it improve?" she asked, already knowing the answer from the doctor's carefully neutral expression. "Some improvement is possible as the inflammation continues to resolve," Dr. Rodriguez said. "But I want to be honest with you. Much of this loss is likely permanent. The infection damaged delicate structures that don't regenerate." The words fell like stones, each one heavy with implications for Tori's future. He had known intellectually that this outcome was probable, but hearing it confirmed crushed the small hope she'd nurtured during her recovery. "So what now?" Jake asked when Tori remained silent. "Now we adapt," Dr. Rodriguez replied with gentle firmness. "Many people lead full, productive lives with unilateral hearing loss. I'd like to refer you to an audiologist to discuss hearing aid options. Technology in this area has advanced tremendously in recent years." Tori nodded mechanically, but inside, a cold numbness was spreading. She wasn't ready to think about hearing aids, about becoming someone who needed assistive devices, someone whose body had fundamentally betrayed her. The drive home passed in silence. Jake attempted conversation several times, but Tori responded with monosyllables, staring out the window at the October landscape, trees stripped bare, fields lying dormant, everything waiting for a spring that seemed impossibly distant. At evening, as Jake prepared dinner, Tori stood in their bathroom, really looking at herself for the first time since the surgery. The woman in the mirror was a stranger, thinner, paler, with shadows beneath her eyes and a new weariness in her expression. She turned slightly, examining the healing incision behind her right ear, still red and angry against her skin. "This isn't me," she whispered, her voice breaking. "This isn't supposed to be me." Tears came then, the first real tears since the surgery. Great heaving sobs that bent her double over the bathroom sink. Jake found her there minutes later, crumpled on the floor, arms wrapped around herself as if trying to hold together something that had shattered. "Tori," he murmured, gathering her into his arms. "Oh, honey, I can't do this," she choked out between sobs. "I can't be this person, Jake. I'm a teacher. I need to hear my students. I need to be whole." "You are whole," he insisted, rocking her gently. "Different maybe, but still whole. Still Tori. Still the strongest person I know." But his words couldn't penetrate the wall of grief that had been building since she first woke in the recovery room to a world that sounded fundamentally wrong. That night, and many nights that followed, she cried herself to sleep in Jake's arms, mourning a loss that no one else could fully understand. Principal Martinez called the following week, his concern evident even through Torai's compromised hearing. "Take all the time you need," he assured her. "Mrs. Henderson is happy to continue with your class through the end of the semester if necessary." "Thank you," Torai replied, the words sticking in her throat. The thought of not returning to her classroom, of surrendering that core piece of her identity, was almost as painful as the thought of trying to teach with her new disability. "The kids miss you," Principal Martinez added gently. "They've made cards. I can have someone drop them by if you'd like." Tori declined, not ready to face tangible reminders of the classroom she might never effectively manage again. After hanging up, she sat at the kitchen table, staring at nothing, a cup of tea cooling untouched before her. Jake found her there an hour later when he came home from the construction site for lunch, still sitting in the same position. "I think I need to resign," she said without preamble. Jake sat across from her, his face carefully neutral. "You think that's the right decision?" "How can I teach when I can't hear half of what's happening in my classroom?" The bitterness in her voice surprised even her. "How can I help students who need me when I can't even help myself?" "Maybe it's too soon to make that decision," Jake suggested cautiously. "You're still healing, still adjusting." But Torai shook her head. "The longer I wait, the harder it will be for everyone. They need to find a permanent replacement, not keep Mrs. Henderson in limbo." Jake reached across the table, covering her hand with his. "Just promise me you won't send that resignation letter today. Give yourself a little more time." She agreed reluctantly, but the thought had taken root. In the days that followed, she drafted and redrafted the letter in her mind, imagining the relief of surrendering the burden of trying to be the teacher she once was. Thanksgiving approached, bringing with it the usual family obligations. Torai's parents were driving up from Arizona, and the traditional family gathering at Rebecca's ranch loomed like a dark cloud on her horizon. The thought of navigating conversations in a crowded room, of constantly asking people to repeat themselves, of seeing the pity in their eyes, it was almost unbearable. "I don't think I can do it," she told Jake the week before the holiday. "Can't we just have a quiet dinner here, just the two of us?" "Your parents are driving 12 hours to see you," he reminded her gently. "And they're worried sick, everyone is." "I don't want to be the center of attention," she said, her voice small. "I don't want to be the tragic topic of conversation." "Then don't be," Jake replied simply. "Be Torai." Stubborn, determined, occasionally infuriating Torai. She almost smiled at that, but the expression faded before it fully formed. "I don't know who that is anymore." The day before Thanksgiving, Rebecca arrived unannounced at their door, arms full of grocery bags. "I'm making pies here," she announced, brushing past Torai into the kitchen. "My oven's acting up." It was a transparent lie. Rebecca had renovated her ranch kitchen just 2 years ago, including top-of-the-line appliances. But Torai didn't have the energy to call her on it. She watched in silent resignation as her cousin unpacked ingredients and began commandeering her kitchen with the focused efficiency that characterized everything Rebecca did. "You don't have to babysit me," Torai finally said, the words coming out sharper than intended. Rebecca paused in measuring flour, fixing her cousin with a steady gaze. "I'm not. I'm making pies with my cousin like we do every year." "Nothing is like every year," Torai replied bitterly. "Nothing will ever be like it was before." "No," Rebecca agreed quietly. "It won't be." Simple acknowledgement, free of platitudes or false encouragement, broke something open in Torai's chest. She sank into a kitchen chair, suddenly exhausted. "I don't know how to do this, Rebecca. I don't know how to be me anymore." Rebecca set down her measuring cup and came to sit beside her cousin. One day at a time, she said, taking Torre's hand. That's all any of us can do. January arrived with a bitter cold snap that sent temperatures plunging below zero across Montana. Torre stood at her kitchen window, watching cardinals flash like drops of blood against the snow-covered landscape. The holidays had passed in a blur of forced smiles and carefully modulated conversations with family members who spoke too loudly, or worse, gave up trying to include her altogether. She'd survived it, barely, retreating to her bedroom whenever the strain of straining to hear became too much. The resignation letter still sat unsent in her desk drawer. Jake had convinced her to wait until after the new year, arguing that major life decisions shouldn't be made during the emotional upheaval of the holidays. She'd agreed, though less from conviction than from the paralyzing indecision that had become her constant companion. There's a physical therapy appointment at 11, Jake reminded her, appearing in the kitchen doorway. He'd taken to keeping track of her medical schedule, knowing she often forgot appointments she didn't want to attend. I remember, Torre said, not turning from the window. And Dr. Rodriguez referred you to that audiologist. I made an appointment for Thursday. At this, she did turn, a flash of the old Torre sparking in her eyes. I don't recall asking you to do that. Jake met her gaze steadily. No, you didn't. But it's been 3 months, Torre. It's time to at least explore your options. She wanted to argue, to tell him he had no right to make decisions for her, but the concern etched in the lines around his eyes stopped her. Jake had been her rock through this nightmare, patient beyond measure with her mood swings and withdrawal. He'd taken over household tasks without complaint, fielded endless calls and visitors, all while managing the construction business through its busy winter season. Fine, she relented. I'll go, but I'm not promising anything. His relief was palpable. That's all I'm asking. Physical therapy was a necessary torture Torre endured twice weekly exercises designed to address the balance issues that sometimes accompanied her hearing loss. Today's session left her tired, but marginally less wobbly. A small victory she acknowledged with grudging gratitude. As she waited for Jake to pick her up, Torre noticed an elderly woman watching her from across the rehab center's waiting room. Woman was perhaps in her 70s, with silver hair cut in a stylish bob and alert hazel eyes that crinkled when she smiled, which she did when she caught Torre's gaze. Balance exercises, the woman asked, her voice clear and precisely modulated. Torre nodded automatically, turning her left ear toward the woman. How did you know? The way you're sitting, very deliberately centered in that chair. I remember those days. The woman crossed the room with the help of a sleek black cane and sat beside Torre. Margaret Whitman. Everyone calls me Maggie. Victoria Miller, Torre. Vestibular issues, Maggie asked, gesturing vaguely toward her own ear. Torre stiffened, her instinctive defensiveness rising. Something like that. If Maggie noticed her reticence, she didn't show it. I lost my hearing completely in my right ear 15 years ago. Viral infection. Played havoc with my balance for months. Despite herself, Torre was intrigued. And now I can do this. Maggie demonstrated by closing her eyes and extending her arms, holding the position with perfect steadiness. Takes time, but the brain is remarkably adaptable. What did you do for work, Maggie smiled. I am a high school English teacher, 37 years and counting. Torre's heart skipped a beat. You still teach, with no hearing in one ear? Indeed I do. AP Literature at Roosevelt High. Maggie studied Torre's face, understanding dawning in her eyes. You're a teacher too, aren't you? High school biology, Torre admitted. Or I was, I'm not sure I can go back. Ah, Maggie nodded sagely. I remember that feeling too, like you've lost a fundamental tool of your trade. Exactly, Tori breathed. The simple acknowledgement loosened something tight in her chest. How do you manage in the classroom? She asked. I mean with adaptations and technology, Maggie replied matter-of-factly. And by remembering that what makes a great teacher isn't perfect hearing. It's passion, knowledge, and genuine care for your students. Before Tori could respond, the center's door opened, admitting a blast of cold air and Jake, stomping snow from his boots. Maggie rose with surprising grace for a woman her age. Looks like your ride is here. She pressed a small card into Tori's hand. My number, if you ever want to talk shop with someone who's been where you are. Tori stared at the card all the way home, turning it over in her fingers like a talisman. Jake glanced at her curiously but didn't pry, recognizing that something had shifted in his wife's demeanor. That night, for the first time in months, Tori initiated a conversation about her future. I met someone today, she began hesitantly over dinner. A teacher who's completely deaf in one ear. Jake set down his fork, giving her his full attention. At physical therapy, Tori nodded. She's been teaching for over 30 years, 15 of them with unilateral hearing loss. She paused, gathering courage to voice the thought that had been forming since meeting Maggie. Maybe I've been thinking about this all wrong. How so? I've been focusing on what I've lost, not what I still have. She twisted Maggie's card between her fingers. I still have one good ear. I still know how to teach. Maybe I just need to learn how to do it differently. The hope that bloomed in Jake's eyes was almost painful to see. That sounds like my Tori talking. She managed a small smile, the first genuine one in weeks. I think I've been buried under a lot of self-pity. You've been grieving, Jake corrected gently. There's a difference. Maybe she reached across the table to take his hand. But I think I'm ready to try moving forward, starting with that audiologist appointment on Thursday. The audiologist's office was modern and welcoming, with none of the clinical sterility Tori had come to associate with medical facilities. Dr. Alina Martinez, a petite woman with a warm smile and brisk efficiency, conducted a thorough examination of Tori's hearing, confirming what Dr. Rodriguez had already diagnosed: severe hearing loss in the right ear with normal function in the left. You're an excellent candidate for a CROS hearing aid system, Dr. Martinez explained, showing Tori a digital model on her tablet. It uses a transmitter on your impaired side to capture sound and wirelessly send it to a receiver on your good ear. Essentially, it reroutes the sound your right ear would normally hear to your left ear. Would that help in a classroom setting? Tori asked, allowing herself to feel a flicker of hope. Absolutely. We also have adaptive technologies specifically designed for educational environments, FM systems, that can connect directly to your hearing aid, for instance. And there are strategies for classroom management that many teachers with hearing loss find helpful. For the first time since her surgery, Tori found herself leaning forward, engaged and curious, asking questions about technologies and techniques she'd previously refused to consider. Dr. Martinez answered each one patiently, occasionally sharing anecdotes about other teachers she'd worked with. I'd like to try, Tori decided by the end of the appointment. The CROS system, I mean. Dr. Martinez beamed. Wonderful. We'll need to take impressions of your ears today, and then it will take about 2 weeks to get your custom devices made. In the meantime, I have some resources for you about adapting to unilateral hearing loss. Leaving the office with a folder full of information and a follow-up appointment scheduled, Tori felt something she hadn't experienced in months possibility. The world hadn't expanded back to its previous dimensions, but perhaps it wasn't as constricted as she'd believed. That evening, She did something else she'd been avoiding. She called Maggie Whitman. "I'd like to hear more," she said when the older woman answered. "About teaching with hearing loss, I mean." "I thought you might," Maggie replied, the smile evident in her voice. "How about coffee tomorrow? I know a place where the acoustics are decent for conversation." The next afternoon, Tori sat across from Maggie in a quiet corner of a small cafe, clutching a mug of Earl Grey as if it might anchor her to this newfound resolve. Maggie had arrived with a canvas tote bag filled with what she called her adaptation toolkit: specialized microphones, visual aids, and classroom management strategies she developed over 15 years of teaching with unilateral deafness. The first year was the hardest, Maggie admitted, stirring honey into her chamomile tea. "I had to relearn how to track multiple voices in a classroom discussion, how to position myself for optimal hearing, how to advocate for my needs without making my disability the focus of attention." "That's what I'm afraid of," Tori confessed. "Becoming the teacher with hearing loss instead of just Mrs. Miller." "That's a valid concern," Maggie acknowledged. "But in my experience, it becomes less of an issue more quickly than you might think. Students are remarkably adaptable, especially when you're straightforward with them." "Mine are teenagers," Tori pointed out. "Your high schoolers might be more mature about it," Maggie chuckled. "You'd be surprised. Teenagers can sometimes be more accepting than adults, less self-consciousness, more natural curiosity." As their conversation continued, Tori found herself taking mental notes, occasionally jotting ideas in the small notebook she'd brought along. For the first time, she began to envision a path back to her classroom altered, yes, but not diminished. "There's something else," Maggie said as they prepared to leave, her expression growing serious. "Something I wish someone had told me early on." "What's that?" "This experience will make you a better teacher." Maggie held up a hand when Tori began to protest. "I know that sounds like one of those insipid, everything happens for a reason platitudes, but hear me out. Teaching with a disability has made me more attuned to the different ways students learn and communicate. It's made me more creative, more patient, and more empathetic to students facing their own challenges." Tori considered this, turning the idea over in her mind. "I never thought about it that way." "Most people don't," Maggie smiled, gathering her things. "But I suspect you will from now on." First day of February dawned clear and cold, with a hint of spring in the quality of light streaming through the classroom windows. Victoria Miller stood at the front of room 207, watching as her AP biology students filtered in from the hallway, their curious gazes immediately drawn to the sleek device curving behind her right ear. "Good morning, everyone," she greeted them, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. "It's good to be back." For a moment, the students seemed uncertain how to respond, glancing at each other with the silent communication unique to teenagers who have shared an experience. Then Marcus Thompson, ever the icebreaker, stepped forward with a broad grin. "We missed you, Mrs. Miller," he declared, and the dam broke. Suddenly she was surrounded by chattering 17-year-olds, all talking at once in their excitement to share 3 months' worth of news. "One at a time, please," Tori reminded them, tapping her ear with a smile. "Remember what we discussed in my letter." The students immediately moderated their volume and began taking turns speaking, a result of the detailed letter Tori had sent home the week before, explaining her hearing loss and the simple accommodations that would help in the classroom. It spent hours drafting that letter with Maggie's guidance, finding the right balance between honesty and reassurance, between explaining her needs and maintaining her authority. "I have something cool to show you," she said once the initial excitement had settled. She held up a small microphone connected to a lanyard. "This is part of my hearing system. When you're speaking from the back of the room or working in groups, I might ask you to use it. It sends your voice directly to my hearing aid." The students regarded the device with fascinated respect, as if she'd introduced a piece of spy equipment. "Does it hurt your ear?" asked Jessica Park, her question genuine and without embarrassment. "Not anymore," Tori answered honestly. "And my hearing aid actually helps a lot, though I still need to see your faces when you're speaking. That's why we rearranged the desks in a horseshoe shape." Marcus nodded knowingly, clearly proud to be in the know as Tori's student helper. The previous semester, he'd been enlisted by Principal Martinez to help prepare the classroom for her return. "Exactly right, Marcus," Tori confirmed. "Now we have a lot of catching up to do. Who can tell me what you've been working on in genetics with Mrs. Henderson?" The morning proceeded more smoothly than Tori had dared to hope. The students, primed by her letter, and a discussion led by the school counselor the previous week, adapted to her needs with minimal prompting. They raised their hands before speaking, faced her when asking questions, and used the FM microphone during small group activities without complaint. There were awkward moments, of course. Twice, she had to ask a student to repeat a question. Once, during a particularly animated discussion about DNA replication, she lost track of who was speaking as multiple hands shot into the air. But these stumbles were minor compared to the overwhelming success of being back in her classroom, doing what she loved. At lunch, her colleagues in the teacher's lounge greeted her with warm hugs and minimal fuss, following her lead in treating her return as unremarkable. Only Alina Williams, her closest friend on staff, pulled her aside with genuine concern. "How are you really doing?" she asked quietly. "Honestly, better than I expected," Tori admitted. "The kids have been amazing, and the technology helps more than I thought it would. They've been counting down the days until you came back," Alina revealed. Every morning, Marcus would update the calendar on the bulletin board. It was quite sweet. The afternoon brought new challenges as the class tackled a lab experiment involving small groups. Monitoring multiple conversations taxed Tori's adapted hearing, and by the final bell, she was physically and mentally exhausted. But it was a different kind of tired than the debilitating fatigue of depression that had characterized her months of recovery. This was the satisfying weariness of meaningful work. Jake was waiting in the truck when she emerged from the building, having insisted on driving her on this important day. His anxious expression melted into relief when he saw her smile. "Good day?" he asked as she slid into the passenger seat. "Good day," she confirmed. "Tiring but good." That evening, as they prepared dinner together, a normalcy they had only recently reclaimed, Tori found herself reflecting on the journey of the past 7 months. From the first troubling symptoms after her visit to Rebecca's ranch, through the horror of the diagnosis, the trauma of 2 surgeries, the depths of depression, and finally, the slow climb back toward a reconfigured life. "I think I'm going to develop a safety curriculum for the school," she said, the idea that had been percolating all day finally taking shape. "About vector-borne diseases and parasites. Age-appropriate, of course. Something that teaches awareness without creating fear." Jake paused in chopping vegetables. "That sounds like an excellent idea. Maggie says that finding purpose in our challenges helps with healing," Tori continued. "And if I can prevent even one student from going through something like this." "I think it's perfect," Jake said, his eyes suspiciously bright. "And very you, very me," she echoed, testing the phrase. "I'm starting to recognize that person again." The following week, Tori presented her curriculum idea to Principal Martinez, who embraced it enthusiastically and suggested she develop it for district-wide implementation. By mid-February, she was working with the school nurse to create grade-appropriate materials on outdoor safety, proper hygiene after animal contact, and recognizing early symptoms that should prompt medical attention. Rebecca, upon hearing about the project, immediately volunteered her ranch for a controlled educational visit later in the spring. "We'll make it a model of agricultural safety," she declared over Sunday dinner, her natural enthusiasm channeled into something constructive. "I've already implemented all the recommendations from the Agricultural Extension Office, and then some." The cousins' relationship had gradually mended over the winter months, as Tori worked through her complex feelings about the source of her injury. The ranch, once a place of carefree relaxation, still triggered anxiety, but she was determined not to let fear define her connection to her childhood sanctuary. As February yielded to March, Tori received an unexpected email from the State Teachers Association, inviting her to speak at the regional conference about overcoming challenges in the classroom. "They want me to talk about teaching with a disability," she told Jake that evening, her tone a mixture of surprise and trepidation. "Are you comfortable with that?" he asked. Tori considered the question carefully. 7 months ago, even 4 months ago, the answer would have been an immediate, visceral no. But now, I think I am, she realized. If it helps other teachers who might be facing similar challenges, or helps any educator better understand students with hearing loss. Jake smiled, reaching across the table to take her hand. "You know what Maggie would say about this," Tori chuckled, "that it's another opportunity to find purpose in adversity." Exactly. On the last day of school before spring break, Tori took her class outside for their science lesson, a practical demonstration of insect identification and safe outdoor practices. As the students scattered across the school grounds with their observation journals, she noticed Marcus hanging back, eyeing a flowering bush with suspicion. "Everything okay, Marcus?" she asked, approaching him with her clipboard. "There are a lot of bugs on that bush," he observed warily. "Are they dangerous?" 7 months ago, Tori might have dismissed his concern with a casual reassurance. Now she knelt beside him, giving the question the respect it deserved. "Those are honey bees," she explained. "They're actually beneficial insects, important pollinators, but you're right to be cautious around any insect you're not familiar with." She showed him how to observe safely from a distance, pointing out the bees' distinctive features and behaviors. As they watched, a bee landed briefly on Marcus's sleeve, causing him to startle. "It's okay," Tori assured him. "Just stay calm and it will fly away." Sure enough, the bee departed seconds later, returning to the flowers. Marcus exhaled in relief, then looked up at Tori with newfound confidence. "I was scared for a minute," he admitted, "but I did what you said, and it worked." "Being scared is natural," Tori told him. "The trick is to not let fear stop you from learning and experiencing new things." As she spoke the words, Tori recognized their truth in her own life. Fear had nearly overwhelmed her, nearly taken her teaching career and her joy. But here she stood in the spring sunshine, surrounded by curious students, her hand occasionally rising to touch the hearing aid that had become not a symbol of loss, but a tool for moving forward. She glanced up to see Jake watching from the parking lot, having arrived early to drive her to a doctor's appointment. He waved, and she waved back, a simple gesture that carried the weight of all they had weathered together. Life would never be exactly as it was before that fateful July day at Rebecca's ranch. The larvae that had invaded her ear had left permanent marks, both physical and emotional. Standing in that schoolyard, watching her students discover the world with fresh eyes, Victoria Miller knew with certainty that she had found her way back, not to her old life, but to a new one worth living. Life has a way of testing us when we least expect it, doesn't it? One moment, Victoria Miller was enjoying a simple summer day at her cousin's ranch. The next, her world was turned upside down by something as tiny as a parasite. That's how it happens for many of us. The carefully constructed lives we've built over decades can be shaken by a sudden diagnosis, an unexpected loss, or a body that simply doesn't work the way it once did. The journey through grief isn't linear. It's messy, with good days and terrible ones. When Torai lost her hearing in one ear, she didn't just lose sound, she lost her identity as the capable teacher she'd always been. Any of you understand this profound sense of loss when your body betrays you? But Torai's story reminds us that even in our darkest moments, connection saves us. The mentor who appeared when needed most, the husband who never wavered, the cousin who sought forgiveness, the students who adapted without judgment. Our bodies may change as we age, but our capacity to reinvent ourselves remains. Whatever challenge you're facing today, remember Victoria Miller. Ordinary courage can lead us back to extraordinary lives worth living. Rebecca Torres felt her scissors freeze mid-cut, suspended in the thick August air of her small salon. Beneath her client's scalp, something impossible was happening. Thin crimson lines crawled like living serpents under the pale skin, branching and weaving in patterns that defied every law of nature she understood in her 22 years of cutting hair. David Kane sat motionless in the worn burgundy chair, his eyes fixed on his own reflection in the antique mirror that had belonged to Rebecca's grandmother. He seemed completely unaware of the horror unfolding just inches above his skull. The vintage ceiling fans whirred overhead, casting shifting shadows that made the moving lines appear even more grotesque against his pallid complexion. "Dios mio," Rebecca whispered, her voice barely audible above the soft mariachi music playing from the old radio in the corner. Her hand trembled as she watched the scarlet trails pulse and shift, creating new pathways across David's head like some nightmarish roadmap drawn in blood. In 22 years of cutting hair, Rebecca had never seen anything alive under someone's scalp. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. Whatever was moving beneath David's skin was not supposed to be there. This wasn't a rash, wasn't dry skin, wasn't anything remotely normal. The scissors slipped from her numb fingers, clattering onto the black and white checkered linoleum floor, with a sound that seemed to echo through the suddenly silent shop. Rebecca Torres had owned Bella Vista Hair Studio for 18 years. Ever since her husband Carlos died in that terrible collision at the intersection of Maple and 3rd Street 4 years ago. Small salon on Main Street in Cedar Falls, Iowa had become her lifeline, the only thing keeping her and her 17-year-old daughter Maya afloat in a sea of medical bills and mounting debt. Maya's congenital heart disease required constant monitoring, expensive medications, and now the doctors were saying she needed a transplant within the next 72 hours. The irony wasn't lost on Rebecca that she spent her days making other people look beautiful while her own world crumbled around her. Every snip of her scissors, every blow dry, every $25 haircut was a desperate attempt to keep Maya's heart beating, and the lights on in their small apartment above the Mexican bakery next door. Insurance money from Carlos's death had long since disappeared into the bottomless pit of cardiac specialists and emergency room visits. The bright yellow walls of the salon, painted to match the sunflowers Carlos had loved, now felt like a mockery of the happiness they once represented. David Kane had been coming to her salon for the past 8 months, always on the first Thursday of every month, always asking for the same simple trim. He was a quiet man in his late 30s with hollow cheeks and nervous hands that never seemed to stop moving. Rebecca knew he was a veteran. She'd seen the military tattoo on his forearm when he rolled up his sleeves, but he never talked about his service. Most days he barely spoke at all, just nodded his thanks and left a decent tip. There was something haunted about David, something broken that reminded Rebecca of her own grief. His dark eyes held the same kind of pain she saw in her mirror every morning, the weight of loss that never quite lifted. He lived alone in a small apartment on Oak Street, worked part-time at Riverside Garden Center, and seemed to exist in a world of his own making. Maya often stopped by the salon after school, doing her homework in the corner chair while Rebecca worked. Despite her illness, Maya was bright and compassionate, with her father's warm smile and her mother's stubborn determination. She'd grown wise beyond her years, understanding without being told that every client who walked through their door represented another day she might live, another treatment she might receive. The three of them, Rebecca, David, and Maya, were connected by threads of loneliness and survival in ways none of them fully understood. Thursday afternoon arrived with the weight of dread that had become Rebecca's constant companion. Maya had been admitted to Cedar Falls Medical Center that morning, her heart monitor showing the irregular rhythms that meant time was running out. The doctors had moved her to the top of the transplant list, but compatible hearts were rare, and Rebecca knew the statistics weren't in their favor. The salon felt emptier than usual despite having 4 clients scheduled. Rebecca had considered canceling, staying at the hospital with Maya, but the harsh reality was that she needed every dollar. The medical bills wouldn't pause for her grief, and Maya's medications cost more than most people's rent. When David Kane walked through the door at exactly 2:15, as he had every month for the past 8 months, Rebecca barely looked up from sweeping hair clippings. He moved with his usual careful precision, hanging his worn denim jacket on the hook by the door and settling into the familiar chair without a word. "The usual?" Rebecca asked, though she already knew the answer. David always wanted the same thing, a simple trim, nothing fancy, nothing that would draw attention. He nodded, but something was different today. His hands shook more than usual as he gripped the armrests, and there were dark circles under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. When Rebecca draped the cape around his shoulders, she noticed he flinched at her touch. "You feeling all right, David?" she asked, running her fingers through his dark hair to assess the length. That's when she first felt it, raised bumps along his scalp like tiny ridges under the skin. "Just tired," he mumbled, his voice hoarse. "Been having trouble sleeping." Rebecca began cutting, her scissors moving in the familiar rhythm that had sustained her for decades. But as she worked, she couldn't ignore what she was seeing. Thin red lines crisscrossed David's scalp like a road map, some barely visible, others raised and angry-looking. They seemed to branch and connect in patterns that made no medical sense. "David, when's the last time you saw a doctor?" she asked, pausing in her cutting. "These marks on your head, it's nothing," he interrupted quickly, his reflection meeting her eyes in the mirror. "Just dry skin. Been working in the garden center, lots of dust and dirt." But Rebecca had seen dry skin before, had dealt with every scalp condition imaginable in her years behind the chair. This was something else entirely. The lines seemed to pulse slightly, as if there was movement beneath them. One particular track ran from his left temple down behind his ear, raised and red like a fresh scar. "Maybe you should have someone take a look," she started, but David's hand shot up to stop her. "Please just finish the cut," he said, and there was something desperate in his voice. "I need to get back to work." Rebecca hesitated, her professional instincts warring with her concern. She'd never seen anything like this before, and David's obvious distress only made her more worried. But he was a paying customer, and she needed the money. As she continued cutting, David began scratching at his arms through his shirt sleeves. Scratching grew more intense, more frantic, until Rebecca could see him drawing blood through the fabric. "David, you're hurting yourself," she said, setting down her scissors. "They itch," he whispered, his voice breaking. "God, they itch so bad. It's like they're moving under there, crawling around. I can feel them all the time now." Rebecca's blood ran cold. The way he said them suggested he wasn't talking about a rash or dry skin. She looked more closely at his scalp, and what she saw made her stomach lurch. The raised lines were moving subtly, but definitely moving like something was traveling beneath the surface. "Jesus Christ," she breathed, stepping back from the chair. David's eyes rolled back, and he began to convulse slightly. "Can't make them stop," he muttered. "They're getting worse. Started in my feet, now they're everywhere. Sometimes I can see trails in my vision, like they're behind my eyes too." Rebecca's hands shook as she reached for her phone. Whatever was happening to David Kane, it was beyond anything she could handle with scissors and hair products. This was a medical emergency, and possibly something contagious. "I'm calling 911, she announced, but David tried to stand up, the cape still around his shoulders. No doctors," he pleaded, stumbling toward the door. "You don't understand. I deserve this. I deserve every bit of this pain." Before Rebecca could stop him, David collapsed onto the salon floor, his body shaking uncontrollably as those mysterious red lines seemed to pulse more violently across his exposed scalp. The ambulance arrived within minutes, its red and blue lights casting eerie shadows through the salon's front windows. Rebecca knelt beside David's convulsing form, holding a towel against his head where he'd struck the floor during his collapse. The paramedics worked quickly, checking his vitals and loading him onto a stretcher while Rebecca explained what she'd witnessed. "Ma'am, we're going to need you to come with us," the lead paramedic said, his face grim. "You may have been exposed to whatever's affecting him, and the doctors will want to examine you too." The ride to Cedar Falls Medical Center felt like an eternity. David drifted in and out of consciousness, mumbling incoherently about deserving punishment and something about trails. Rebecca sat in the corner of the ambulance, her mind racing between concern for this strange man and desperate worry about Maya, who was somewhere in the same hospital they were speeding toward. Dr. Jennifer Walsh had seen unusual cases during her 12 years in emergency medicine, but nothing had prepared her for David Kane. The red raised lines covering his scalp and extending down his neck defied immediate diagnosis. Under the harsh fluorescent lights of the trauma bay, the marks appeared even more disturbing, forming intricate patterns that seemed almost deliberate. "How long has he been like this?" Dr. Walsh asked Rebecca, who stood nervously by the doorway. "I don't know. He's been my client for months, but today was the first time I really noticed the marks. He said they itched, that he could feel things moving under his skin." "Doctor," Walsh frowned, studying David's medical information. Something about his address caught her attention. 1247 Oak Street. She'd lived in Cedar Falls long enough to know that was near the intersection where that terrible collision had occurred 4 years ago, the one that killed Carlos Torres. "Mrs. Torres," she said carefully, "your husband's accident happened near Oak Street, didn't it?" Rebecca's face went pale. "Yes, but why?" She stopped mid-sentence, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. "You don't think David was?" Before Dr. Walsh could respond, a nurse rushed in with urgent news about Maya Torres' condition. Rebecca's daughter had taken a turn for the worse, her heart function declining rapidly. The transplant team was being assembled, but without a compatible donor, time was running out. Rebecca felt the world spinning around her. Her daughter was dying floors above them, and the man lying unconscious before her might be connected to her husband's death. The coincidence seemed too cruel to be random. "I need to see Maya," Rebecca said, backing toward the door. Mrs. Torres, wait, Dr. Walsh called after her. We need to run some tests on you. Make sure you weren't exposed to anything contagious. But Rebecca was already running down the hallway, her mind reeling with possibilities she didn't want to consider. She found Maya's room in the cardiac ICU, where machines beeped steadily around her daughter's pale form. Maya's eyes opened when she heard her mother enter. "Mom," Maya's voice was weak but alert. "What happened? You look terrible." Rebecca tried to compose herself, sitting beside Maya's bed and taking her daughter's cold hand. "Just a client at the salon had a medical emergency. How are you feeling, Mija?" "Tired, really tired." Maya squeezed her mother's hand. "The doctors say they're looking for a heart, but..." She didn't finish the sentence, but they both knew the odds. Meanwhile, back in the emergency room, David had regained consciousness and was becoming increasingly agitated. Dr. Walsh tried to calm him while preparing to take skin samples from the affected areas. "Please," David whispered, grabbing the doctor's wrist with surprising strength. "Don't try to fix this. I did something terrible, and this is my punishment. I deserve whatever's happening to me. Mr. Kane, whatever you think you've done, this medical condition isn't some form of divine retribution. We need to identify what's causing these symptoms." David's eyes filled with tears. "For years ago, I killed someone, hit and run. I was drunk, scared, and I ran. Every day since then, I've wished I could take it back, wished I could trade places with him." Doctor Walsh felt her blood run cold. The timeline matched perfectly with Carlos Torres' death. "Mr. Kane, where exactly did this accident occur?" "Corner of Oak and 3rd, David sobbed. "Hit a man walking to his car after work. Carlos Torres. I've been trying to find a way to make it right ever since, but nothing I do brings him back." The pieces fell into place with horrifying clarity. Carlos Torres' widow was upstairs praying for a miracle to save their daughter, while his killer lay dying from a mysterious illness that seemed to be eating him alive from the inside out. The cruel irony of the situation wasn't lost on Dr. Walsh. She needed to make a decision that would affect 3 lives forever. Should she tell Rebecca Torres that her husband's killer was lying unconscious 1 floor below her dying daughter? Should she focus on treating David despite his confession? And most importantly, how could she possibly navigate the ethical minefield that this situation had become? The hospital's paging system crackled to life, announcing that a compatible heart donor had been found for Maya Torres. But as Dr. Walsh looked down at David's declining vital signs, she realized the situation was about to become even more complicated than anyone could have imagined. Dr. Walsh stood frozen in the doorway of David's room, watching the monitors that tracked his deteriorating condition. The mysterious red lines across his scalp had grown more pronounced, and new ones were appearing along his neck and arms. Whatever was affecting him was spreading, and she'd never seen anything like it in her medical career. Her first priority was determining if David's condition was contagious. She ordered immediate isolation protocols and arranged for Rebecca Torres to be examined by infectious disease specialists. The hospital's lab began running every test they could think of: bacterial cultures, viral panels, parasitology studies, and toxicology screens. But with each passing hour, David's symptoms became more bizarre and inexplicable. The patient himself had become increasingly delirious, alternating between periods of lucidity, where he would confess repeatedly to the hit-and-run accident, and episodes of complete confusion, where he would claw at his skin and speak to people who weren't there. During one particularly disturbing episode, he began describing the accident in vivid detail. "I see him every night," David whispered to Dr. Walsh during one of his clearer moments. "Carlos Torres. He was just walking to his car, probably thinking about getting home to his family. I was coming around the corner too fast, and I'd been drinking at Riley's Tavern. When I hit him, I stopped for maybe 10 seconds. I could see he was hurt bad, maybe dying, but I got scared and drove away. Dr. Walsh listened, knowing she was hearing a confession that would normally go to police, but David seemed beyond caring about legal consequences. His physical condition was deteriorating rapidly, with new neurological symptoms appearing hourly. I found out who he was from the newspaper, David continued, tears streaming down his face. Saw the picture of his wife and daughter at the funeral. That little girl, Maya. She was so young, and her mother looked destroyed. I wanted to come forward, but I was a coward. Instead, I've been trying to help them anonymously. This revelation stunned Dr. Walsh. What do you mean, helping them? The insurance adjustments, the medical bill payments that got mysteriously reduced, that was me. I set up accounts, used my military disability payments and savings to help with Maya's medical costs. I figured it was the least I could do, but it never felt like enough. Meanwhile, 3 floors up in the cardiac ICU, Rebecca was holding vigil beside Maya's bed when a social worker approached with paperwork about the potential heart donor. The donor was a young motorcycle accident victim from Des Moines, but there were complications with organ viability that might delay the surgery. How long can Maya wait? Rebecca asked the transplant coordinator. Maybe 18 hours, possibly less. Her heart function is declining faster than we anticipated. Rebecca felt the familiar crushing weight of helplessness. Every decision, every moment now seemed critical, and she had no control over any of it. She thought about the strange man from her salon, wondering if he was still in the hospital, wondering what could cause such horrific symptoms. Back in the emergency department, Dr. Walsh was piecing together David's medical history when she made a disturbing discovery. David had been a patient at the Veterans Affairs Hospital psychiatric unit for the past year, being treated for severe PTSD and what his therapist described as pathological guilt syndrome. The psychiatric notes painted a picture of a man consumed by self-hatred and a twisted desire for punishment. 8 months ago, David had been hospitalized after deliberately injuring himself with garden tools. The incident had been classified as a suicide attempt, but reading between the lines, Dr. Walsh began to suspect something more sinister. She called David's psychiatrist, Dr. Patricia Kim, who agreed to come to the hospital immediately. When Dr. Kim arrived and saw David's condition, her face went white. "This is what I was afraid of," Dr. Kim said quietly. "David has been fixated on the idea that he deserves to suffer for what he did. 4 months ago, he started talking about natural justice and how he wanted to be consumed by something from the inside out, the way guilt was consuming him." "Are you suggesting he did this to himself intentionally?" Dr. Walsh asked. "I'm afraid so. David has been researching tropical diseases and parasitic infections. He was particularly interested in conditions that cause visible suffering. I tried to get him committed for his own safety, but he was functional enough to refuse extended treatment. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, but they created a picture more disturbing than Dr. Walsh had imagined. David Kane had deliberately infected himself with some kind of parasitic organism as a form of self-punishment for the hit-and-run accident. Laboratory results began coming back throughout the evening, confirming Dr. Walsh's worst fears. David was infected with cutaneous larva migrans, commonly known as creeping eruption, a parasitic infection typically contracted from contaminated soil where cats and dogs have defecated. The parasites burrow under the skin, creating the characteristic red winding tracks that had so horrified Rebecca Torres. But David's case was far more severe than anything in the medical literature. Instead of the typical superficial skin infection, the parasites had somehow penetrated deeper into his system, affecting his nervous system and causing the neurological symptoms. How is this possible? Dr. Walsh asked Dr. Michael Stevens, the infectious disease specialist who had been called in for consultation. Larva migrans doesn't typically progress like this, Dr. Stevens replied grimly. It doesn't, unless someone deliberately maintains the infection and prevents healing. This patient has been reinfecting himself repeatedly, probably by applying contaminated soil to open wounds. The parasitic load is unlike anything I've ever seen. The treatment protocol was complex and would require weeks of intensive antiparasitic medication. But Dr. Stevens was optimistic that with aggressive treatment, David could recover fully. However, David himself remained resistant to treatment, insisting that he deserved whatever was happening to him. As the night wore on, Rebecca moved between Maya's room and the hospital cafeteria, trying to process everything that was happening. She had no idea that her husband's killer was being treated just a few floors below, or that he had been secretly helping to pay Maya's medical bills for the past 3 years. The morning brought devastating news about Maya's potential heart donor. The organ had been damaged during transport and was no longer viable. Maya had been moved back to the top of the transplant list, but compatible donors were rare, and time was running out faster than anyone had anticipated. Dr. Walsh faced an impossible ethical dilemma. David Kane was a universal organ donor according to his medical records, and if his current infection could be cleared, his organs would be perfect matches for several patients, including Maya Torres. Revealing this information would mean telling Rebecca that her husband's killer could potentially save her daughter's life. The moral complexity of the situation was staggering. Here was a man who had destroyed one family, trying to atone by saving the life of his victim's daughter, while literally destroying himself in the process. The intersection of guilt, redemption, medical ethics, and pure human need created a scenario that no textbook had prepared any of them for. As Rebecca sat beside Maya's bed, watching her daughter's condition worsen, she noticed a familiar figure being wheeled past the doorway on a hospital gurney. It was David Kane, looking even worse than when she'd seen him collapse in her salon. Without thinking, she followed the gurney down the hallway. "Excuse me," she called to the orderly. "Where are you taking him?" "ICU, ma'am. This patient's pretty sick." Rebecca stood in the hallway, staring after the disappearing gurney, feeling an odd connection to this strange man who had been her client for months. Something about his collapse in her salon had seemed deeply personal, as if his suffering was connected to her own in ways she couldn't understand. She had no idea how right she was, or how much more complicated her world was about to become. Intensive care unit at Cedar Falls Medical Center had never felt more like a battlefield than it did that Friday morning. Rebecca Torres stood outside David Kane's room, her hand pressed against the glass partition, watching the man who had collapsed in her salon fight for his life. She didn't know why she felt compelled to stay, why this stranger's suffering seemed to echo her own grief, but something kept her rooted to that spot in the hallway. Dr. Walsh emerged from David's room, looking exhausted and troubled. She'd been working around the clock, consulting with specialists across the country about David's unusual case. The parasitic infection had progressed beyond anything documented in medical journals, and his body was beginning to shut down from the toxic load of organisms in his system. "Mrs. Torres," Dr. Walsh approached Rebecca carefully. "I didn't expect to see you here. How is Maya doing?" Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. Not good. They lost the donor heart during transport last night. The doctors say she has maybe 8 hours before. She couldn't finish the sentence, doctor. Walsh felt her heart break a little more. The cruel irony of the situation was becoming unbearable. Here stood a mother watching her daughter die, while the man who could potentially save Maya's life lay dying in the room behind them. The same man who had killed Maya's father 4 years ago. Mrs. Torres, I need to tell you something about Mr. Kane, Dr. Walsh began. But before she could continue, alarms began blaring from David's room. The medical team rushed in as David's body convulsed violently. The parasitic infection had reached a critical stage, causing severe neurological complications. His blood pressure was dropping rapidly, and his heart rhythm had become dangerously irregular. The monitors showed the unmistakable signs of multi-organ failure. We're losing him, shouted Dr. Stevens, the infectious disease specialist. If we don't start aggressive treatment now, he'll be dead within the hour. But David, in a moment of lucidity between seizures, grabbed Dr. Walsh's hand with surprising strength. No treatment, he gasped. Let me die. It's what I deserve. Mr. Kane, you don't understand, Dr. Walsh said urgently. Your organs could save lives. There's a young girl upstairs, Maya Torres. David whispered, his eyes suddenly focusing with startling clarity. Carlos Torres' daughter. Is she the one who needs a heart? Dr. Walsh was stunned. How did you know? David's face crumpled with anguish. I've been following her case for 4 years. Anonymous donations to help with medical bills, paying insurance copays through a third party. I killed her father, and I've been trying to make amends ever since. Rebecca, who had been listening from the doorway, felt the blood drain from her face. The words hit her like a physical blow, and she had to grip the door frame to keep from falling. What did you just say? David's eyes met hers through the maze of medical equipment. Mrs. Torres, I'm so sorry. I was driving drunk that night 4 years ago. I hit your husband at the corner of Oak and 3rd. I was scared and I ran. I've regretted it every single day since. The room fell silent except for the mechanical beeping of monitors. Rebecca stared at David with a mixture of shock, rage, and disbelief. This dying man, was the one who had destroyed her world, who had left her a widow and Maya fatherless. You, she whispered, her voice barely audible. You killed Carlos. Yes, David said simply. And I've been trying to die ever since. This infection, I did it to myself. I wanted to suffer the way I made you and Maya suffer. Rebecca felt something snap inside her. 4 years of grief, of financial struggles, of watching her daughter slowly die while the man responsible for their pain lived freely. It all erupted at once. She lunged toward David's bed, but Dr. Walsh caught her. You bastard, Rebecca screamed. Do you know what you've put us through? Do you know how many nights Maya cried for her pappy? How many times I've had to choose between groceries and her medication? David closed his eyes, tears streaming down his face. I know. I've watched from a distance. I've seen Maya at the school plays, seen you working extra hours at the salon. I set up the anonymous payment system because I couldn't live with the guilt, but it never felt like enough. It wasn't enough, Rebecca sobbed. Nothing could ever be enough, Doctor. Walsh gently guided Rebecca away from David's bed, but she could see the internal struggle playing out on the grieving mother's face. Revelation had shattered Rebecca's world again. But there was something else happening, a terrible understanding of the impossible choice now before her. Mrs. Torres, Dr. Walsh said quietly, Mr. Kane is a universal organ donor. His heart would be compatible with Maya's blood type and body size. If we can stabilize him and clear the infection, his organs could save not just Maya, but several other patients. Rebecca looked back at David, who was watching her with eyes full of pain and desperate hope. "You want me to let you save my daughter's life after what you did? I want to give you back what I took away," David whispered. "I can't bring Carlos back, but maybe I can make sure Maya gets to live the life she deserves, a life with her mother, a life full of possibilities." The ethical complexities of the situation were staggering. Dr. Walsh had consulted with the hospital's ethics committee, but they'd never faced anything like this. Could they morally accept organs from someone who had deliberately infected himself? Could they ask a mother to accept life-saving organs from her husband's killer? Rebecca sank into a chair beside David's bed, her mind reeling. Maya was dying upstairs, and here was the man responsible for so much of their pain, offering the ultimate sacrifice. But was it justice, or just another cruel twist of fate? "How do I know this isn't just another selfish act?" Rebecca asked, her voice hollow. "How do I know you're not just trying to ease your own guilt?" David struggled to sit up slightly. "Because I'm not asking for forgiveness, Mrs. Torres. I know I don't deserve that. I'm asking for the chance to do one thing right before I die. Maya doesn't deserve to pay for my mistakes." Dr. Walsh stepped forward. "Mrs. Torres, I need to be clear about the medical realities. Even if you agreed to this, we'd need to treat Mr. Kane's infection first. The parasites in his system make organ donation risky right now. But there's an experimental treatment that could clear the infection within hours while preserving organ viability." "And if the treatment works?" Rebecca asked. "Then Mr. Kane would likely survive," Dr. Walsh admitted. "The infection would be gone, and he'd recover fully." Rebecca stared at David, processing this information. If she agreed to let them treat him, he might live. The man who killed her husband might walk away from this hospital while she went home to plan Maya's funeral. But if she refused treatment and let him die, Maya would die too. The monitors showed David's condition continuing to deteriorate. Time was running out for both him and Maya, and Rebecca Torres faced the most impossible decision of her life. The weight of decision crushed down on Rebecca Torres like a physical force. She sat in the uncomfortable hospital chair beside David Kane's bed, watching the monitors that tracked his failing vital signs while her daughter lay dying 3 floors above them. The cruel mathematics of the situation were inescapable. If David died, Maya died with him. If David lived, her husband's killer would walk free while she buried her only child. Dr. Walsh stood quietly in the corner, giving Rebecca space to process the impossible choice before her. The experimental treatment that could save David's life and clear his system for organ donation was ready to be administered, but they needed Rebecca's consent. The ethics committee had ruled that since Maya was a minor and Rebecca was her guardian, the decision ultimately rested with her. "How long do I have to decide?" Rebecca asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Not long," Dr. Walsh replied gently. "His organs are beginning to shut down from the parasitic load. If we don't start treatment within the next hour," Rebecca looked at David, who had slipped back into unconsciousness. Even in his fevered state, his face was twisted with pain, both physical and emotional. The red tracks across his scalp had darkened, spreading down his neck like crimson rivers of guilt made manifest on his skin. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Young nurse entered, her expression grave. "Mrs. Torres, your daughter is asking for you. She's having difficulty breathing." Rebecca's heart shattered all over again. She rushed to Maya's room, where her 17-year-old daughter lay connected to increasingly complex machinery. Maya's lips had taken on a bluish tint, and her breathing was labored despite the oxygen mask covering her face. "Mommy," Maya's voice was barely audible through the mask. "The doctor said there might be a donor." Rebecca took her daughter's cold hand, fighting back tears. "There might be, Mija, but it's complicated. Maya studied her mother's face with the wisdom that comes from facing death too young. It's something bad, isn't it? Something that's making you sad beyond just being scared for me. Rebecca marveled at her daughter's perceptiveness even now. The potential donor, he's someone who hurt our family, someone who hurt Pappy. Maya's eyes widened slightly, but she didn't pull away. Instead, she squeezed her mother's hand with what little strength she had left. The person who caused the accident. Yes. Maya was quiet for a long moment. Her breathing labored, but her mind clearly working. Mommy, do you remember what Pappy used to say about forgiveness? Rebecca's throat tightened. Carlos had been a deeply spiritual man despite rarely attending church. He'd often talked about how forgiveness wasn't about the person who had wronged you. It was about freeing yourself from the poison of hatred. He used to say that carrying anger was like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. Maybe, Maya whispered, maybe this is Pappy's way of telling us it's time to let go. Maya, you don't understand what you're asking. I'm not asking for anything, Mommy. I'm just saying that if someone wants to give me life, and if that gift comes from a place of genuine remorse, maybe that's not the worst thing that could happen. Rebecca stared at her daughter, amazed by her maturity and grace. Even facing death, Maya was thinking more clearly than any of the adults around her. But if you accept his heart, you'll carry a piece of your father's killer inside you for the rest of your life, Rebecca said, voicing her deepest fear. Maya managed a weak smile. Or maybe I'll carry a piece of someone who learned to be better than his worst moment. Maybe that's what Pappy would want, for something good to come from something terrible. Down in the ICU, David Kane's condition continued to deteriorate. His body temperature had spiked dangerously high, and his kidney function was declining rapidly. Dr. Walsh knew they were minutes away from the point of no return. Rebecca returned to David's room, her mind churning with Maya's words. He looked at this broken man who had shattered her world, trying to see past her rage, to find some trace of the person Maya seemed to believe existed beneath the guilt and self-destruction. Dr. Walsh, Rebecca said finally, if you save him, what guarantee do I have that he won't just disappear? That he won't take Maya's second chance at life and waste it? There are no guarantees, Mrs. Torres. But I can tell you that in my professional opinion, Mr. Kane is genuinely consumed by remorse. The fact that he's been anonymously helping with Maya's medical expenses for 4 years suggests a man trying to make amends, not someone looking to escape consequences. Rebecca closed her eyes, feeling the weight of Carlos's absence more acutely than she had since the day he died. What would he want her to do? What would he say about mercy versus justice? If I say yes, Rebecca said slowly, I want conditions. Dr. Walsh nodded. What kind of conditions? If he survives, I want him to face legal consequences for what he did. I want him to turn himself in to the police. And I want him to understand that this gift, Maya's life, comes with the responsibility to live better than he has been. David's eyes fluttered open as if he had heard her words. Mrs. Torres, he whispered hoarsely, I've been trying to turn myself in for 4 years. Every time I got close, I chickened out. But if Maya lives because of this, I promise you I'll walk into the police station the day I'm discharged from this hospital. Rebecca studied his face, looking for any sign of deception. All she saw was a broken man desperate for redemption, willing to trade his freedom for the chance to undo even a small part of the damage he'd caused. And the money? Rebecca asked. The anonymous payments will continue, David said. I have a disability settlement from the Army. Every penny of it will go toward Maya's care and your family's expenses for as long as I'm able. Rebecca felt something shift inside her chest, Not forgiveness, not yet, but perhaps the first small crack in the wall of hatred she'd built around her heart. She looked at the monitors showing David's declining vital signs, then thought of Maya upstairs, fighting for every breath. "Dr. Walsh," Rebecca said, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face, "start the treatment." The medical team sprang into action with practiced efficiency. The experimental antiparasitic medication was administered through David's IV, and within minutes, his vital signs began to stabilize. The treatment was aggressive and would take several hours to fully clear his system, but early indicators were positive. As the afternoon wore on, Rebecca found herself moving between Maya's room and David's, watching two lives hang in the balance, one she would die to protect, the other she had every reason to hate. The hospital chaplain stopped by to offer support, but Rebecca found herself beyond the comfort of platitudes. By evening, David's condition had improved dramatically. The parasitic infection was clearing, and his organs were showing signs of recovery. Dr. Walsh cautiously optimized that within 24 hours, he would be stable enough for organ harvesting if needed. But as David's physical condition improved, his emotional state seemed to deteriorate. The weight of what was happening, the possibility that his death might save the daughter of the man he killed, was almost too much to bear. "I don't deserve this chance," he told Rebecca during one of her visits. "I don't deserve to live while Maya might die." "You're right," Rebecca said simply. "You don't deserve it, but Maya does. And if your living means she lives, then that's what we'll have to learn to live with." The tragedy was that even with the successful treatment, there was no guarantee that David's organs would be compatible or that the transplant would be successful. They had bought time, not certainty, and Maya's condition continued to worsen as they waited. Friday morning brought the kind of devastating news that changes everything in an instant. Dr. Walsh found Rebecca in the hospital cafeteria, staring at an untouched cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. The doctor's expression was grave as she sat down across from Rebecca, preparing to deliver information that would shatter what little hope remained. "Mrs. Torres, we need to talk about Maya's condition," Dr. Walsh began carefully. "Her heart function declined significantly overnight. We've moved her to the highest priority status, but her body is beginning to reject the medications that have been keeping her stable." Rebecca felt the familiar crushing weight in her chest. "How long does she have?" "Hours, maybe less. Her kidneys are starting to fail, which means even if we find a compatible heart, her body might not be strong enough to survive the transplant surgery." The words hung in the air between them like a death sentence. Rebecca had prepared herself for this possibility for years, but the reality was still unbearable. Her beautiful, brave daughter, who had faced her illness with such grace and wisdom, was slipping away despite everything they had done. "What about David's heart?" Rebecca asked desperately. "The treatment worked, didn't it, Doctor?" Walsh hesitated. "The experimental treatment was successful in clearing the parasitic infection, and Mr. Kane's organs are now viable for transplant. But there's something else we discovered during the tissue typing process." Rebecca's stomach dropped. "What kind of something?" "Mr. Kane's heart has a congenital defect, a minor one that wouldn't affect his daily life, but it makes the organ unsuitable for transplant. The defect would be fatal in someone with Maya's compromised cardiovascular system." The cruel irony was almost unbearable. David Kane had survived his self-inflicted punishment. His organs had been cleared for donation. But the one organ Maya needed most was the one he couldn't give her. Rebecca felt like the universe was playing some cosmic joke, dangling hope in front of her only to snatch it away at the last moment. "Are you telling me that after everything, After I made the decision to save him, after all this, his heart can't help Maya anyway. I'm so sorry, Mrs. Torres. We ran the tests 3 times to be certain. Mr. Kane's liver, kidneys, and other organs are perfect for donation, but his heart. Dr. Walsh shook her head sadly. Rebecca stood up abruptly, knocking over her coffee cup. The brown liquid spread across the white table like a stain, and she watched it with detached fascination, as if it represented the mess her life had become. I need to see him. David Kane was sitting up in bed when Rebecca entered his room, looking healthier than he had in months. The treatment had worked almost miraculously. The red tracks on his scalp were fading, his color had returned to normal, and his eyes were clear and focused. He looked like a man who had been given a second chance at life, which made what Rebecca had to tell him even more devastating. Mrs. Torres, David said, struggling to sit up straighter. How is Maya? When can we do the transplant? Rebecca's composure finally cracked. We can't, she said, her voice breaking. Your heart has a defect. You can't save her. David's face went white. What do you mean? I thought the treatment worked. It did work. You're going to live, David. You're going to walk out of this hospital healthy and whole while my daughter dies anyway. The bitterness in Rebecca's voice was corrosive. Congratulations. You get to keep the life you tried so hard to throw away. David stared at her in horror. No, that's not. There has to be something else. Other organs, experimental procedures, something. There's nothing, Rebecca said flatly. Maya needs a heart and yours won't work. It's over. The weight of this revelation settled over David like a physical force. He had been prepared to die to save Maya, had found peace in the idea that his death could somehow balance the scales of justice. But now he would live while she died, carrying the guilt of 2 deaths instead of 1. Mrs. Torres, please, David said desperately. Money I've been sending, it'll continue. I'll sell everything I own. I'll work 3 jobs. Money won't buy her a new heart, Rebecca interrupted. Money won't bring back the 4 years she's already lost, or the childhood she never got to have because she was always too sick. Rebecca turned to leave, but David called out to her. Wait, please. There's something else you need to know. She paused at the doorway, not turning around. The accident, David said quietly. It wasn't exactly what I told you before. Rebecca turned slowly, her eyes narrowing. What do you mean? David took a shuddering breath. I was drunk, yes, and I was driving too fast. But your husband, Carlos, he didn't just walk into the street. He ran out suddenly like he was chasing something or someone. You're lying, Rebecca's voice was dangerously quiet. I'm not. I've replayed that night in my head 1,000 times. Carlos ran into the street from between 2 parked cars. I tried to brake, tried to swerve, but there wasn't enough time. The impact, it threw him almost 30 feet. Rebecca felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. Why are you telling me this now? Because I want you to know that I've been carrying guilt for something that might have been unavoidable, even if I'd been sober. But I was too much of a coward to stay and find out. I was too scared to face what I'd done, so I ran and let you think the worst. The revelation hit Rebecca like a physical blow. For 4 years, she had imagined her husband's death as a moment of pure evil, a drunk driver carelessly mowing down an innocent man. But if David was telling the truth, the accident might have been just that, an accident, compounded by poor choices and fear. Even if that's true, Rebecca said, you still left him to die alone on the street. You still ran away and let me wonder for 4 years what happened to my husband. I know, David said, tears streaming down his face. And I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make up for that cowardice. But I wanted you to know the truth before. He didn't finish the sentence, but they both knew what he meant. Before Maya died, before it was too late for the truth to matter, Rebecca stood in the doorway, processing this new information while her daughter lay dying upstairs. Part of her wanted to reject David's revised version of events, to hold on to the pure hatred that had sustained her through 4 years of grief. but another part of her recognized the ring of truth in his words. "Mrs. Torres," David said softly, "I know my heart can't save Maya, but maybe there's another way I can help." Rebecca looked at him with exhausted eyes. "What could you possibly do now?" "I can tell the police exactly what happened that night. I can make sure the insurance company knows the full truth about the accident. There might be additional coverage benefits you never received because they ruled it an act of vehicular homicide instead of an accident." It was a small offer, insignificant compared to the magnitude of loss Rebecca faced, but it was something. In the midst of devastating tragedy, David Kane was still trying to find ways to help the family he had wronged. Rebecca closed her eyes, feeling the weight of 4 years of anger beginning to shift. Wasn't ready to forgive, might never be ready, but she was beginning to understand that the world was more complicated than her grief had allowed her to see. "I need to get back to Maya," she said finally. "Mrs. Torres," David called as she reached the door. "I meant what I said about turning myself in. Whether Maya lives or dies, I'm going to face the consequences of what I did that night." Rebecca nodded without turning around. Justice, she was learning, was more complex than she had ever imagined. And mercy, she was discovering, sometimes came in forms too painful to accept. Rebecca returned to Maya's room to find her daughter surrounded by a team of doctors and nurses, their faces bearing the grim expressions that meant time had run out. Maya's breathing had become increasingly labored, and the monitors showed her heart struggling with an irregular rhythm that medication could no longer control. Dr. Patricia Wells, the head of cardiology, approached Rebecca with the gentleness reserved for delivering the worst possible news. "Mrs. Torres, Maya's condition has deteriorated beyond what we can manage medically. Her heart is failing, and her other organs are beginning to shut down. We've exhausted all treatment options." Dr. Wells paused, allowing the weight of her words to settle. "I think it's time to discuss making her as comfortable as possible." Rebecca felt the world collapse around her. After years of fighting, of hoping, of believing that somehow they would beat this disease, it was ending exactly as she had always feared it would. Her brave, beautiful daughter was going to die, and there was nothing left that modern medicine could do to prevent it. "How long?" Rebecca whispered. "Few hours at most. Her body is shutting down rapidly now." Rebecca nodded numbly and took her position beside Maya's bed. Her daughter's eyes were closed, but her breathing, though labored, was still steady. Rebecca took Maya's hand, marveling at how cold and fragile it felt. This was the same hand that had once gripped hers so tightly on the first day of kindergarten. The same hand that had learned to braid hair and write poetry and paint watercolors that still hung on their refrigerator at home. "Maya Mija," Rebecca whispered, "can you hear me?" Maya's eyes fluttered open, focusing on her mother with effort. "Mommy, is it time?" Rebecca couldn't speak past the lump in her throat, so she just nodded. Maya squeezed her hand with what little strength she had left. "I'm not scared," Maya said softly. "I've had a good life, even if it was shorter than we hoped. And I got to have you as my mommy, which was the best part of all." Tears streamed down Rebecca's face as she listened to her 17-year-old daughter comfort her in these final moments. Maya had always been wise beyond her years, but this grace in the face of death was almost too much to bear. "I love you so much, Maya, more than all the stars in the sky. I love you too, Mommy, and I want you to know something. I'm not angry about any of it, not the sickness, not the pain, not even about what happened to Pappy. Sometimes bad things just happen, and that doesn't mean anyone's to blame." Maya paused, gathering her strength. "That man downstairs, the one whose heart couldn't help me, I want you to know that I forgive him. For Pappy, for everything. And I hope someday you can too." Rebecca marveled at her daughter's compassion even now. How can you forgive so easily? Because holding on to anger takes energy I don't have anymore, Maya said with a weak smile. And because Pappy always said that forgiveness was a gift you give yourself, not the person who hurt you. As the afternoon wore on, Maya drifted in and out of consciousness. Rebecca called her sister Maria, who lived 2 states away, and Maya's best friend Jessica from school. They arrived within hours, creating a small circle of love around Maya's bed. The hospital chaplain came by and offered prayers, and the nursing staff moved quietly and respectfully, giving the family space to say their goodbyes. 3 floors below, David Kane sat in his hospital bed, tormented by the knowledge that Maya Torres was dying while he lived. Dr. Walsh had updated him on Maya's condition, and the guilt was consuming him more effectively than any parasite ever could. He had prayed more in the past 24 hours than he had in his entire adult life, begging whatever higher power might be listening to take his life instead of hers. At 6 o'clock that evening, something extraordinary happened. Dr. Walsh burst into Maya's room with news that seemed impossible given the circumstances. "Mrs. Torres, we just received a call from University of Iowa Hospitals. They have a heart, a perfect match for Maya's blood type and body size. The donor is a 20-year-old who suffered brain death in a motorcycle accident this morning." Rebecca looked up from Maya's bedside, hardly daring to hope. "But Maya's condition, you said her other organs were failing." "They were, but in the past hour, her kidney function has stabilized. It's as if her body is fighting back, giving us one last window of opportunity. The heart is being transported by helicopter as we speak. If we act quickly, we might still be able to save her." The room erupted into controlled chaos as the medical team began preparations for emergency surgery. Maya was barely conscious, but she managed to squeeze her mother's hand as they prepared to wheel her into the operating room. "Mommy," Maya whispered, "if this doesn't work." "It's going to work," Rebecca said firmly, though her heart was breaking. "You're going to live, Mija. You're going to have the life you deserve." Maya smiled weakly. "And if it does work, promise me you'll try to forgive him. Promise me you'll try to let go of the anger." Rebecca nodded through her tears. "I promise." As Maya was wheeled into surgery, Rebecca found herself alone in the hallway, surrounded by the controlled chaos of a hospital at night. She walked slowly to the chapel, a small, quiet room where she had spent countless hours over the years praying for Maya's recovery. She wasn't alone. David Kane sat in the back pew, his head bowed in prayer. He looked up when she entered, his eyes red from crying. "Mrs. Torres, I heard about the heart, about Maya's surgery." Rebecca sat down heavily in the pew across from him. "She asked me to forgive you," she said without preamble. "Even now, even dying, she was worried about me carrying anger." David nodded. "She sounds like a remarkable young woman, like her father." "You didn't know Carlos." "No, but I've watched Maya from a distance for 4 years. The kindness, the strength, the way she treats everyone with dignity, those aren't things that develop in a vacuum. She learned them from someone." They sat in silence for a long moment, 2 people united by tragedy and the fragile hope that Maya might survive the night. "If she lives," David said finally, "I want you to know that I meant what I said about turning myself in. Win or lose, I'm going to face the consequences of what I did that night." Rebecca studied his face in the soft light of the chapel. "And if she doesn't make it, then I'll still turn myself in, but I'll probably die of guilt long before any court can sentence me." Rebecca found herself believing him. The man sitting across from her bore little resemblance to the monster she had imagined for 4 years. He was broken, haunted, desperate for redemption, but he wasn't evil. He was just human, flawed, and damaged like everyone else. "David," she said quietly, "Maya made me promise to try to forgive you. I'm not there yet. I may never be there completely. But I want you to know that I'm going to try." David's face crumpled with emotion. "Mrs. Torres, I don't deserve." "No, you probably don't," Rebecca interrupted. "But Maya deserves to have a mother who isn't eaten alive by hatred. And maybe Carlos deserves to have his death mean something more than just another tragedy." They prayed together in the chapel, two unlikely companions bound by loss and hope, while upstairs a team of surgeons worked to give Maya Torres the gift of life from a stranger who would never know the miracle their death had made possible. The surgery lasted 9 hours. Rebecca and David waited together, joined eventually by Maya's Aunt Maria and several friends from school. The waiting room became a small community of people united by their love for one brave young woman and their desperate hope that she would survive the night. At 4 o'clock in the morning, Dr. Wells emerged from the operating room, still in her surgical scrubs. Her expression was cautiously optimistic. "The surgery was successful," she announced to the small crowd. "Maya's body accepted the new heart, and her vital signs are strong. He's not out of danger yet, but for the first time in years, I'm genuinely hopeful about her prognosis." Rebecca collapsed into David's arms, sobbing with relief and exhaustion. In that moment, the boundaries between victim and perpetrator, forgiveness and justice, seemed less important than the simple miracle that Maya was going to live. 7 months later, Rebecca Torres stood in her salon, watching David Kane sweep the floors with the same methodical care he brought to everything these days. The red tracks on his scalp had faded to faint silver lines, scars that served as permanent reminders of how close he'd come to destroying himself with guilt. Maya sat in the corner doing homework, her color healthy and vibrant for the first time in years, occasionally looking up to tease David about missing a spot. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. David had kept his promise, turning himself in to police the day he was discharged from the hospital. The charges were reduced to vehicular manslaughter after the full investigation revealed the complexity of that tragic night 4 years ago. He served 8 months in county jail and was sentenced to 5 years of community service, which he fulfilled by working at the salon and volunteering at the Veterans Center he'd helped establish. The anonymous payments had continued, but now they came openly, along with David's presence in their lives. Wasn't family, that boundary would never be crossed, but he had become something Rebecca never expected, a friend, forged in the crucible of shared tragedy and mutual healing. Maya's recovery had been remarkable. The new heart had given her energy she'd never known, and she threw herself into life with the enthusiasm of someone who understood its preciousness. She played on the school's volleyball team, joined the debate club, and had already been accepted to 3 universities with full scholarships. More importantly, she had become an advocate for organ donation, speaking at schools and community centers about the gift of life she'd received. The relationship between Rebecca and David was complicated in ways that outsiders sometimes struggled to understand. There were still days when she looked at him and felt the sharp stab of grief for Carlos. There were moments when the unfairness of David's continued existence, while Carlos lay in the ground, threatened to overwhelm her. Those moments came less frequently now, replaced by something she'd never expected: gratitude. Not gratitude for the accident, that would never be something she could accept or forgive completely, but gratitude for David's genuine remorse, for his dedication to making amends, and for the way he had quietly become part of Maya's support system without ever trying to replace the father she'd lost. The community had watched their unlikely relationship with fascination and occasional judgment. Some people couldn't understand how Rebecca could bear to have David in her life, much less employ him in her business. Others saw their story as a powerful example of forgiveness and redemption. Rebecca had learned to ignore both the critics and the admirers, focusing instead on the simple truth that healing sometimes came in unexpected forms. Dr. Walsh still stopped by the salon occasionally for haircuts, marveling at the transformation she'd witnessed. She'd written about David's case in medical journals, focusing on the psychological aspects of his self-inflicted illness, but she always kept the personal details private. The medical community had learned from David's case, leading to better protocols for identifying and treating patients who might be harming themselves as a form of psychological punishment. On this particular Wednesday evening, as Rebecca locked up the salon and David finished his cleaning duties, Maya looked up from her textbooks with the serious expression she wore when something important was on her mind. "Mommy, David, I've been thinking about something," she said, closing her biology book. "Next month marks 4 years since Pappy died and 5 years since I first got really sick. I want to do something to mark those anniversaries, something positive." Rebecca and David both turned to look at her, waiting for her to continue. "I want to organize a memorial walk for Pappy, but also a celebration of organ donation and second chances. I want to raise money for other families dealing with medical crises, and I want to tell our story, all of our story, so people understand that healing isn't always simple or pretty, but it's always possible." Rebecca felt tears spring to her eyes. Even now, Maya continued to amaze her with her wisdom and compassion. "That sounds like a beautiful way to honor your father's memory," Rebecca said softly. David nodded, his own eyes damp. "I'd be honored to help if you think it's appropriate for me to be involved." Maya smiled at both of them. "Of course it's appropriate. This is our story now, all 3 of us. And I think Pappy would want his death to mean something more than just an ending. I think he'd want it to be a beginning too." As they walked home together through the quiet streets of Cedar Falls, Rebecca reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. She thought about Carlos and how he might view the strange family they'd become. She thought about forgiveness and how it wasn't a single moment of decision, but an ongoing choice made new each day. Most of all, she thought about Maya alive and thriving, carrying within her chest the heart of a stranger whose death had given meaning to all their struggles. In the end, perhaps that was what redemption looked like. Not a grand gesture or a moment of perfect absolution, but the quiet daily work of choosing hope over hatred, healing over hurt, and love over the endless cycle of pain. The red tracks on David's scalp had faded, but the lessons they'd learned together would last forever. Sometimes the most profound healing comes not from forgetting the past, but from finding ways to transform it into something that serves life rather than death, hope rather than despair. In the gathering dusk, 3 people walked home together, bound by tragedy, but sustained by grace, living proof that even the darkest chapters can lead to unexpected light. Thank you for spending this time with Brad Arrows. We hope the stories whispered through the rain carried you far into your imagination or your dreams. If you're still awake, let us know how you liked the journey. Until next time, stay safe, sleep well, and let the darkness comfort you.